Stranded in a strange forest with only a pencil and paper, NC clung to his pencil and kept sketching. Art had always been his refuge through the toughest years of school. His parents kept hurling his drawing supplies into the trash, again and again. He scraped together every penny to replace them. Painting wasn't a hobby, it was the lifeline that kept him alive. Before arriving at this strange place, disappointment gnawed at Togo and fierce determination roared under his skin. He hunched over his newly purchased oil paints, heart pounding as the colors called to him. The teacher burst in bearing treats, a rare, bright kindness he'd almost never seen at home. Togo sacrificed his entire week's pocket money to buy the materials for the heart. The teacher arrived bearing sticky mochi, a steaming pot of tea, and sun-warm fruits he'd plucked from his garden to feed Togo. The snacks blurred into the background, he barely spared them a glance. Cherry tomatoes gleaming on the table snagged his eye and ignited him, sending his pencil tearing into a brand-new sketch. His teacher flashed a knowing smile and urged him to eat, reminding him that wasting food was wrong. It slammed a spotlight on Togo's insatiable hunger for art. As his parents and school raked him with criticism, his teacher carved out a refuge, a safe place where Togo could finally speak his truth. Only that classroom dared to let the art of that breathe, free from every critic's stare. Scorn rained down, taunts stung, and his rations rotted. Togo gritted his teeth and charged forward. He swore he'd never stop painting, even if every brushstroke cost him his life. Togo jolted awake, slumped against a tree, his mind a thick haze as sensation seeped back into his limbs. He blinked and realized he'd been swallowed by a dense, mysterious forest he didn't recognize, still in his school uniform, his memory a foggy blur. Shining flowers burst into light, eerie sunflowers glowered, and enormous stone-like mushrooms surrounded him. This strange place from another world tore logic to shreds. Reality crashed over him and he swallowed the impossible. He'd been ripped from his life and flung into another world. Determination flared in his chest as he plunged into the unknown, scouring the nearby land for a village or a soul who could help. The deeper Togo plunged into the forest, the plants grew stranger and stranger. A few dandelions and violets felt like familiar faces while the rest stared back utterly alien. Years crawled by with no signs of settlements, water, or food. Hunger gnawed at him until he stared at the sunflowers and saw them as food. Before he could even try, a voice cut him off with a sharp warning, and fear slammed into him. The flower spoke, he froze, disbelief locking him to the spot. He gagged at the disgusting taste, but it was the first creature he'd managed to communicate with here. Night fell and the glowing flowers cast a faint, ghostly light. He pressed his back to the tree, a fierce itch to sketch gnawing at him. I plunged my hand into the jacket and snatched a stubby pencil, a battered eraser, and a few scrap sheets ready for doodling. He snatched a flat stone from the floral glow and blasted it with color, launching into a feverish painting. Knowing hunger, burning thirst, and crushing fatigue couldn't stop them. He dove headfirst into painting, every brushstroke a refuge that quieted the storm inside. He snatched up his favorite modi and barley tea from home. The instant he finished, the paper sprang to life and modi and tea burst forth, suddenly real and solid in his hands. Hunger roared in his gut, the world tilted, and his hand lunged for food on pure instinct. He took a bite and the flavor exploded across his tongue, leaving him wide-eyed and stunned. At first, dread clenched his gut. He was convinced the painted food was a trap. The bitter bite of urine and the thin barley tea punched him with the same cold reality as the gifts his teacher had given him. Doubt snarled that they might not be safe, but hunger crashed through him and he willingly devoured them. Confusion slammed him when the paper went spotless like it had never been touched, and he suddenly believed his drawings could leap off the page. He lunged in and repainted the moth and the tea to test it. They burst back into view. This wasn't a lone fluke, it was undeniably, terrifyingly real. That night, Togo painted like a man possessed. Rice cakes and steaming tea leapt from his drawings until his hunger was quenched. Next morning, Togo snapped awake in the exact spot he'd conked out after devouring mochi. Elation exploded through him as his drawings leapt off the page into reality. He couldn't believe his eyes. Fire burned in him. He had to push this power to its breaking point. He snatched up a pencil and paper, geared up to draw cherry tomatoes, then gaped as the page stayed stubbornly blank. Nothing appeared. Then Togo spotted his pencil's tip had gone blunt, feverishly drew a fresh one to replace it, and watched it fail again. He sharpened the pencil, his mind racing through the bizarre rules of his brand-new, uncanny ability. So far, only the knife he ripped from its sheath has sprung to life. The tomato and the pencil he'd been hunting are still nowhere to be found. Noon bled into afternoon as he slipped back into what he knew best. Again, the sketched urine morphed into real, warm, soft urine and pooled on his plate. Mid-bite, he craved a bed, a futon, or even just a blanket to turn his rough outdoor naps into real comfort. And his gaze snapped to a single, blood-red berry glinting close by. A grin tore across his face as he realized the world was blazing with colors he hadn't seen in years. Every canvas he'd painted so far screamed in black and white. He stood there, jaw tight, craving the first blast of color. He snatched a stone and smashed the red berry into a burst of ruby juice. He knew his drawings could only be black and white. It was the rule. Driven by a fierce spark, he crushed a red berry and smeared its juice across the page, flooding his cherry tomato sketch with color. Breath snagged in his throat, he watched the tomato burst into life, plump and glowing. Color breathed life into his drawings. They demanded the perfect shades. Thick white for urine, cloak barley tea, and the knife in dark shades. He gripped a green pencil and tore into the paper with furious strokes. Tomato bombed. It never ripened into the fiery red it desperately needed. Skill and tiny details could still tip the balance, but Togo finally cracked the basic rules. The real problem, a meager stash of resources, left him scrambling. He'd had enough of chewing mochi nonstop and was itching for something new, edamame. The ability struck like destiny and ignited the dawning of a brand new life. The voices that used to judge and rein him in fell silent. For the first time, he claimed a goal that belonged only to him. He dives headfirst to collect colors and test how far his art can stretch. That evening, he ripped a thick black and white blanket, one that had mysteriously materialized, around himself and sank into its cocoon. At last, he sank into a comfortable doze, relief washing over him even as a dull ache throbbed along his back. By morning, Togo decided. He whipped up a simple bag sketch, slipped into a white shirt, and stood ready to dash out for paints. He strode, curiosity blazing. Could minerals or flowers be turned into paints? A lightning bolt realization struck the moment he found bright red flowers and crushed their petals with a stone. I wavered, pulse racing, doubting it would actually work. He sketched an apple, delicately infused crimson flower extract into the drawing, then harvested bright yellow straight from the flower's pollen. After several hours of grueling work, the apple looked so lifelike it practically breathed. They pulled it off, but at a crawl, 3 hours for a single apple. A simpler way had to be found. And it hit him, he could paint directly with real paints. He sketched the paint tube, then slashed red floral pigment across the packaging. He froze, breath held as it sprang into flawless action. A faint pink hue dressed the paint, but it detonated expectations, effective and revolutionary. Togo crushed berries and ground red clay into bold pigments, conjuring new colors, and with each fresh shade his world burst open. He spotted it, the paints he'd made were pale and lifeless. He hurled every remedy at them, the flowers' bright red still bled out. Layer after layer of dye didn't help. The moment Togo laid down the final stroke, that barely visible red flared and the drawing sprang to life. If he hesitated on the final strokes, the sketch jolted to life too soon. He ripped through the paints, madly chasing the perfect hue. Cold's gnawing thought about that deep, blood-red hue ripped through his mind. Despair clawed at him. He nicked his arm and gathered the tiny bead of pigment. The method hit its mark. Bright carmine paint burst into Togo's collection, and the price tag punched the air from his lungs. Red secured, he tore off to hunt yellow and blue and blow his palette wide open. After hours of relentless searching, he stumbled upon a colossal lily whose petals gaped wide enough for him to walk right inside. The stamens inside exploded with pollen, showering him with so much golden dust he could whip up a bright yellow dye. Pollen plastered his hands. He snatched a glass and poured water over them, rinsing the yellowed dust clean. The glass materialized in his hands, and as he scrubbed it clean, his gaze snapped to another, uglier problem. He needed a relentless lifeline of water, not a single half-drawn sketch. No river in sight. He clenched his jaw and vowed to carve one from the earth. Zeroing in on the perfect place, I dove into the stone, etching a razor-precise image that caught every ripple of the running water and each glittering flash of its reflections. The project gripped him until night swallowed the sky, glowing flowers washing the world in eerie light. Hired in content, Togo drifted off, cradled in the giant lily's soft petals. The next day he slammed down the final stroke. His masterpiece stood finished. He etched the source's exact sketch into his mind, planted himself on the chosen spot, waited for the moment, and nothing happened. He stared at the bare ground, disappointment swelled, and right then doubt barged in. The drawing he painted suddenly snapped to life and began moving on its own. It contracted and writhed, and in an instant the pure spring he'd imagined burst into being right before their eyes. Togo gaped. The sight felt unreal, and as he stepped toward its source, a sickening wave of dizziness crashed over him. The room spun, his knees buckled, and he blacked out. He jolted awake to see the spring still shimmering in the sun, a relentless pounding rattling his skull. He crawled to the water's edge, doused his face with frantic handfuls, then greedily gulped the cool, refreshing water. The leaf crashed over him the instant the truth snapped into focus. He hasn't had a single sip since yesterday. Did dehydration just knock him out? Gorging, the source bled him dry more than he'd expected, and his stomach roared before he could form another thought. He yanked out a magnifying glass and angled it to concentrate sunlight onto black paper until it burst into flames. Fire erupted, and he snatched a frying pan and a thick hunk of meat. They tended it carefully over the crackling fire. The first bite burst with flavor but screamed for a pinch of salt. One quick sketch produced a chunk of rock salt, which he ground into gritty flakes to season the food. Improvement burst into view, his belly full, and water at last. He relished it, satisfaction and a silent triumph thrumming through his veins. For the next few days, he'll live off meat. After eating, he dropped into his seat and spread out the paints he'd fought to gather. Reds wrested from flowers, berries, clay, and even his own blood, and yellows pressed out of pollen and clay. Earth blackened him and stone dust scarred him. A rock-solid collection, its palette dominated by bruised reds, sunlit yellows, and earthy browns. He craved blue with every ounce of himself, even when it seemed utterly impossible. He felt a memory snap into place. That brilliant blue came from the rare lapis lazuli, a stone forever beyond his reach. He needed green like oxygen. Without it, painted plants felt unfinished, and sometimes green even supplanted blue. He clawed at the leaves 3 times. Each time the bright green bled out into brown. Disappointment and fierce resolve warred inside him as he hoisted the leaf into the sun, its brilliant hue igniting a sudden blaze of inspiration. He split the leaf in half, slicked the edges with sticky lily nectar, pressed it onto his work, then painted an edamame pie. At first, weaving the leaf's natural green into the sketch felt like mere craft, not true art. Then the page snapped awake and something strange unfolded. The picture stuttered, then burst into vivid life right before his eyes. He went speechless as a wildfire of excitement seized him. If true colors could supercharge his sketches like this, he'd reinvent his whole palette. Determined to push his experiments further, he found a dead butterfly and meticulously stripped the fiery orange pigment from its fragile wings. The method worked. A blazing orange burst to life, but just as he was about to celebrate, a jolt of vertigo ripped through him, his vision smeared, his skull feeling like lead, and he grudgingly sank down to rest. Eggs and bacon hissed and sizzled over the roaring fire. Ideas spun like a cyclone in his head until one crucial truth slammed into focus. Needing to find that blue color, he snatched a pencil and paper. You can't draw without the right tools. Homesickness gnawed at him. He was sick of painting in the open air and bone-tired of living without a roof over his head. His mind crackled with daring ideas, and he burned to unleash the swarm of experiments primed to explode into life. The more he thought, the grin split his face. The pure, unbridled freedom to create consumed him. Joy he'd never known exploded through him the moment the new goal appeared. He scrapped his homemade bag and fashioned a sturdy shoulder satchel with his own hands. Outside pressure sparked a quiet, burning satisfaction inside him. Survival stopped being enough. He now hunted the fierce call roaring in his chest. By sundown, he'd fashioned a crude tent from wood and synthetic fabric, a makeshift home carved into the heart of the forest. That night, curled inside the shelter he'd built with his own hands, Togo exhaled as peace flooded his bones and relief uncoiled through him. A dam breaks inside him, the feeling he had shoved down rips free, shining with the joy spilling out of him. Strangeness crashed over him, yet it felt oddly comforting. Lurking unseen in the forest shadows, a mysterious creature fixed a cold, unwavering gaze on his tent. Moonlight seared her outline into the darkness. That morning he snapped awake to birdsong, a rare, raw alarm in the wild, curiously poked his head out of the tent and froze. A titanic bird, larger than any seen before, crashed into the spring, its thunderous splashes declaring it sovereign of the water. He froze entranced as the smooth, shining feathers glimmered in the dawn. Their eyes locked for a heartbeat, curiosity mirrored, then the bird vanished and Togo froze, unable to react. He whispered, "Wow," amazement blazing behind his eyes. His eyes snapped to the spring, where a large, elegant feather floated on the water, faintly glowing and steeped in mystery. A lightning bolt of inspiration hit him. He snatched his sketchbook and feverishly sketched a bird. Not to resurrect it, but to immortalize every ounce of its grandeur on the page. His burst of inspiration crashed the moment a grim realization slammed into him. He was paying the price for a week without washing. He lunged forward and snatched the toiletries the instant they appeared. He scrubbed himself with soap beneath icy spring water, sluicing grime away as the chill stabbed at his skin. He pictured the steam bath's warm embrace, and a grin burst across his face. Clean and clad in fresh clothes, he slung his upgraded backpack over his shoulder and bolted out to track the giant bird. The forest thrummed with wonders, its floor a riot of dazzling, brilliant flowers. Paper-thin lake shells quivered, while strange insects skittered across the mud. He realized how scarce the animals were here, so after hours of wandering the bird leapt into view like a lone flare. Togo's trek slammed him face to face with a colossal tree, a trunk so wide it swallowed the horizon, branches clawing at the sky like giant hands, and high in the crown a massive nest perched. His breath hitched. This was unmistakably the lair of the colossal bird he'd spotted earlier. He locked his gaze on the nest, a proud secret cradled in the towering tree, and burned with certainty. This was the place, the same bird's home. He didn't hesitate. He yanked the ladder that had just materialized in front of them. He inched upward one careful step at a time, then crested the summit as the view ripped the breath from his lungs. Beneath them an endless green forest unfurled, swallowing the horizon. His eyes snapped to the nest. The eggs gleamed a startling, vivid blue, the exact shade of a thrush's egg. Shy to his core, he strained to pour that quiet into every trembling brushstroke. His heart thundered at the blazing color. When he gingerly lifted one egg, a shadow slammed down over him. Togo spun around, and a colossal bird with a piercing gaze hovered above him, pinning him in its stare. Panic slammed into him. He blurted a shaky apology and cradled the egg back into place. He bolted for freedom, but the bird still clung to him and yanked him back before he could get far. The bird snapped its beak around him, pinching him in a savage, unrelenting grip. Tension seized him, certain this was the end. Then, out of nowhere, the tide turned. The bird shoved its eggs toward him like a dare to cradle them. Bafflement froze him, then relief washed over his bones. Sunset draped Togo as a lone bird shot skyward for a single heartbeat. He swooped back, the strange fruit jammed in his beak, the very thing that had fallen earlier. Togo wavered, then sank his teeth in. The fruit detonated with a fiery, peppered blast like a blazing persimmon, and warmth surged through him. It felt strange, but the sensation surged through him, electrifying every nerve. Feathered wing brushed Togo's head, then the bird shot up and flew away again. As it slipped away, he snatched a thick blanket on instinct. He wrapped the cloth around himself and the eggs, tucking them to his chest as the truth slammed into him. The bird had entrusted their care to him. What started as a simple sketch of a bird erupted into something wildly unexpected. Clutching the eggs, a fierce purpose flared in Togo's veins as the enormous bird swooped back, its beak clenched around another spicy fruit. He froze for a heartbeat, then gobbled it down under the bird's unblinking gaze. Bracing for the searing heat, he curled himself around the eggs that night. The gargantuan bird descended and planted itself nearby to rest its wings. At dawn, Togo shot awake, every muscle alight with pain, and froze in terror as a bird hovered over him before he could even move. It shot off, then swooped back and dropped a bundle of warm, thick clothing right at his feet. Baffled but grateful, he yanked the clothes on, and the moment they hugged him, the pain evaporated. A while later, after devouring another fiery fruit, Togo's eyes snapped open as he spotted something jaw-dropping. Beneath it, the eggs shuddered, one split open with a sharp, echoing crack. A tiny chick burst into view, its fluffy feathers gleaming in the sun. It chirped softly and snuggled up to him like a tiny thank you. Togo kept a silent vigil over Chinai all day, watching the chicks burrow into their devoted mother. When the last shell split and all three hatched safely, he let out a relieved laugh. His task was done. Just as he was about to leave, a gigantic bird swooped down and thrust a gift into his hands. A jagged shard of shell pulsed with the same electric blue that inspired him. He wrapped himself in the warm clothing he'd learned to cherish. He was about to say goodbye, but before he could climb down, he froze. His drawing wasn't finished. Sitting down, he brought to life a heart-tugging portrait of a mother bird sheltering her chicks, brush flying as he worked. The bird swooped in and dropped a brand new fruit into his hands, bursting with sweet, dripping juice. A spark hit him. Those sharp fruits were cranking up his body heat and keeping his eggs toasty. Sketch finished, he clutched the priceless shell in his hands and sprinted home. Everyone knew he'd ripped shimmering blue paint straight from the shell of a giant bird. En route, his gaze snapped to a gruesome sight, odd feathers strewn across the forest floor, many matted with blood. He tore across continents, gathering a kaleidoscope of colors, even as his battered sketchbook and faltering skills fought him every step. He could now sketch and bring almost anything to life. Spring burst open, he sketched peach trees, sprawling vines, clean trees, cucumbers, potatoes, and edamame, and a fierce fascination seized him. The space exploded with luminous plants, and Togo, swelling with joy and stung by a pang of regret, watched his drawings spring to life. He forged the area into a tiny spinning farm. Electrified by the wind, he threw himself into raising a proper, sturdy shelter. He kicked off with a sketch of a wooden balcony that matched his vision to the letter. Then the next day he dove into laying out the house's simple frame. In just a few days he raised the walls, hoisted the roof, and fitted every last necessary piece. On the 5th day, Togo halted before a squat wooden house, unassuming outside, its modest rooms offering a simple, cozy warmth. That evening, Essie collapsed onto a real bed for the first time since stumbling into this strange world, and a tidal wave of emotion crashed through him. 2 weeks have burned away since they rushed him here in a breathless blur. He imagined his parents pacing and fretting over him, and a small, sharp guilt pricked his chest. Togo's heart twisted with longing for his teacher above all else, the only person who saw straight into his soul. Unlike most adults, his teacher crackled with something electric, an unshakable anchor he could lean on through any storm. He stared at the wooden ceiling as memories of his teacher slammed into him like a tidal wave. He forced out a ragged whisper of apology to his parents. He swore he'd tear a path back through the void, not to Earth, but to stand before his teacher once more. That thought dragged Togo under. He sank into sleep swaddled in sorrow and calm, then jolted awake late the next morning. The bed clung to him like a velvet trap, too comfortable to leave. A jolt of energy shot through him and he bolted outside. His breath caught as a colossal bird plunged straight into the spring. A great bird that came to bathe every day pounded the air with thunderous wing beats. They drenched him before he could even think about washing his clothes, leaving him soaked to the bone and trembling. Wrapped in a thick blanket, he fought for warmth. Sickness struck and a fever flared through him. The giant bird swooped back, its beak cradling a bundle of bright new clothes. He gaped as the bird piped up, pitching a sleek, stylish cape to finish the look, one that hugged him perfectly like it was tailor-made. Gratitude surged, astonishment burned. He couldn't fathom where the bird kept unearthing those things. Once his sodden clothes dried, he snatched up his brush and dove back into painting. A colossal bird had claimed the old spring for days, so he resolved to create a brand new one. He envisioned a compact, man-made source tucked under a sweeping roof and ringed by elegant columns, built to keep birds from swooping in. His pencil snapped to life, darting across the page like a hidden spring uncoiling. He gaped at the fountain's polished marble, then his eyes snagged on a lingering roughness across its surface. He hadn't even started celebrating when crushing exhaustion slammed into him. Every time he forged a colossal creation, it left him utterly spent. He swore a non-stop rush of water only made it worse, while a simple cup of barley tea or plain water calmed it. The semi-permanent system pumped a steady, non-stop stream of water. At last, Togo's relentless hustle paid off. He snagged crystal-clear, bird-free water for his watercolors. The next morning, he bolted upright and gaped at the unexpected scene before him. A pair of massive white wings erupted, blazing and dazzling under the sun. He barreled to the window and gaped as a majestic Pegasus drank from the spring, but a chill prickled down his spine. Something was dreadfully wrong. One wing hung shredded, white feathers matted with blood. When their eyes locked, Togo froze, then inched toward Pegasus. Up close, the injuries were far worse. Compassion surged. He snatched a pencil and paper, sketched a jar of ointment, and when it materialized, he stepped forward to help. Pegasus recoiled, scrambling away as suspicion burned in its gaze. Awkward silence hung tense, then Pegasus wheeled and limped into the forest. The next morning, Togo burst back to the spring and found Pegasus there again, head bowed as he grazed on the dew-soaked grass. It shuddered, its tip barely kissing the grass. He snatched up a brush and stepped in to help. He conjured a lush, dew-kissed patch of grass so fresh and juicy Pegasus could tear into it without breaking a sweat. Pegasus froze for a heartbeat, then nibbled the freshly picked grass with slow, deliberate bites, savoring every blade. I watched them eat calmly, and a tiny spark of pride flared in my chest. Haunted by the creature's ragged wounds, obsession consumed him. He believed his art could directly heal living flesh. Determination burning, he sketched Pegasus in painstaking detail and then carefully wrapped bandages around the torn wing and injured leg. He froze, breath snatched, as the sketch sprang to life. At first it was barely there, but you couldn't miss it. Bandages sprouted into place. Bandages bit into the Pegasoid, wound tight around each injury. Grinning, he burst out of the house with the laundry, the cool air rushing up to greet him like an old friend. He crept toward the spring, stealing glances at the Pegasus dozing nearby, and before long the winged creature's gaze snapped onto him. To his astonishment, Pegasus glided forward with regal calm, trust pouring off him. Heart hammering, he reached out a trembling hand, and for the first time Pegasus let him run his fingers through his silk-soft mane. It felt like a dream, a person bonded with a Pegasus, and though their first sketch was rough, the creature exploded from the page, breathtakingly alive. Ideas to improve his drawings buzzed in his head, but Pegasus ripped every ounce of his attention away. He knew his skills were raw, but fate smirked and shoved him straight into the fire. In a heartbeat, an even more jaw-dropping guest thundered in a unicorn and shattered bones faintly shimmer in the sun, inching closer to the source. Gogo froze, all blazing in his eyes, as Pegasus swept a wing, beckoned the unicorn closer, and proclaimed him a rock-solid ally. The unicorn lay battered and bleeding. He snatched his sketchbook and feverishly sketched the wounded creature, meticulously drawing bandages over every gash, then, struck by a sudden flash of inspiration, inked a solitary bone into the picture. When the drawing sprang to life, the unicorn reared and unleashed a cry that ripped through the room and lodged in our bones. His wound sealed, the replacement bone fused into a flawless, blindingly bright hole, perfect to the eye, but just a replacement. The unicorn and Pegasus locked eyes, cloaked in mystery, and then the unicorn's grin burst, pure satisfaction, pure joy at the restored bone. Togo crouched by the spring to wash, and the unicorn edged closer, curiosity burning away its caution. Deliberately, Togo extended his hand, raked his fingers through the unicorn's mane, and grazed the bone. The instant his skin met it, a warm surge rolled through his body. The bone thrummed as if alive, crackling with a strange, electric energy. He peeled the bandages away with surgical care and realized the bone was no ordinary replacement. It sprang into existence, already full-grown and chillingly real, before Togo could even grasp the feat he'd just pulled off. The world lurched, his vision smeared and strength drained from his limbs. In a heartbeat, he toppled into darkness. He jolted awake to a colossal bird hovering right over him, its massive wings hammering the air. A lightning bolt of realization slammed into him. The bird had been pressing its body against him, warming him the whole time he was gone. Togo muttered a quick thanks, then whirled to face the Pegasus and unicorn still standing nearby. Curiosity flared, and they dove in to probe the unicorn's bone. It loomed unmistakably real, fully restored by his raw strength. Not just a materialization, he'd actually healed something, and the realization slammed into him like a thunderbolt. It was monumental. Fierce new resolve surged through him. He vowed to heal Pegasus's wings. He's about to faint again, but the Pegasus, whole and splendid, is worth the risk. Pencil poised, he ripped into the page and drew an upgraded Pegasus, both wings honed to perfect shape and carved with razor-sharp detail. The sketch exploded into life, the transformation breathtaking as the Pegasus unfurled its healed wings and glided with effortless, silken grace. He snatched one breath of joy before he predictably crumpled and passed out again. A week later, a new problem slammed into him. The once quiet courtyard had erupted into a bustling, enchanted refuge. Pegasi and unicorns surged in, wave after wave, each arrival laying wounded comrades into Togo's hands to be healed. The other day, he was rebuilding them with trembling hands, only to keep collapsing from sheer exhaustion. His burgeoning herd occasionally abandoned eerie trophies, splintered unicorn bone and drifting feathers. The unicorn gently hoisted him onto its back with its bone, as if grateful, before he could even protest. Without warning, the Pegasus snatched him up and rocketed into the sky, hauling him along with the herd. The vista knocked the wind from him. Below, an endless sea of emerald forest unfurled, and he stood transfixed by its beauty. For the first time, he stared down from that dizzying height as a rush of pure magic flooded him. Togo dove into herd duty, scrubbing and bathing every animal until they gleamed. The horse snapped into alert, muscles coiling as its ears whipped toward the forest's edge. Their senses snapped taut, something lurked close. He followed their gaze, and for the first time since arriving in the strange world, I spotted another teenager pinned at the clearing's edge, eyes wide and frozen, his stare glued to him, who was surrounded by Pegasi and unicorns. Their eyes locked. Togo and the boy froze, shock striking each in its own way. Then the unicorn leveled a bone at the boy and the tension vanished. Panic rooted him to the spot. He fought to calm the situation, shot his hands up, and insisted he'd met no harm. He erupted with a single, desperate question: was Togo the spirit of this place? Blindsided, he gaped, disbelief blazing in his eyes as he thundered that it couldn't be true. His voice tore through the air, spooking the horses into frantic neighs that smothered every other sound. The unicorn reared, horn leveled, and terror flooded the boy. He stammered apology after apology for disturbing it and scrambled backward. A mischievous forest spirit whispered secrets, and together they shattered Togo's resistance. It hit him only later that Togo was a person, and even then he couldn't pin Togo down as man or woman. The boy, the meeting slammed into his life like a scene ripped from a sacred legend. He careened into hallowed ground, knowing that encountering a spirit like that would end him. A boy named Redguard burst forward, declaring he was the second son of the illustrious Redguard family. When Togo ripped the truth free, he revealed he came from another world. Watch confusion snap shut and become a trap. Redguard swallowed tales of strangers from other worlds materializing in his world. He'd always scoffed, convinced they were nothing but myths. Eye to eye with him, he felt those stories could actually be true, and a fierce gratitude flooded him for the encounter. He stood in his family's forest, flung his arms wide, welcomed him with blazing warmth, and thanked him for coming. A sudden, uncanny jolt of recognition struck Togo when he looked at Redguard, and he couldn't pin down why. Redguard hit Togo like a ghost of his old teacher. Then he began to map out the surroundings and admitted his family's territory, sprawling and close to the capital, wasn't as magnificent as it looked. Thick, uncharted forests swallowed almost everything. Their control barely clung to a thin strip at the wood's edge. Redguard bellowed that the power came straight from the spirits. They refused to let anyone set foot there and outlawed felling trees or clearing the land. Curiosity blazing, Togo pressed Redguard. Why did he end up in a place everyone avoided? Redguard's face hardened as he warned that poachers were slipping into the forest. He hunted for Pegasus feathers and for a unicorn, his voice cracking with disappointment. He fired the question at Togo. Had he caught even the faintest flicker of suspicion? He skidded to a halt, then spat out that a handful of injured horses limped toward him. They bared their wounds like a desperate plea for help. He had no leads left, and every sign screamed that Togo had nothing to do with the poachers. His frail frame and brittle limbs screamed he was no hunter. Redguard recognized Togo wasn't cut out for violence or bloodshed. Relief surged through him, but the problem still stood. He exhaled a heavy, frustrated sigh as the forest swarmed with Pegasi and unicorns. Finding one crime scene in that endless wilderness felt impossible, and night was already swallowing the trees. Redguard blurted, cheeks burning, that he was utterly lost. Silence swallowed them for a beat, then they leaned close and whispered to him, "Can you stay the night?" He snatched a pencil and notebook and slammed out a sketch before the fake could even realize what was happening. The sofa erupted into being directly in front of them, planted squarely and facing them like a challenge. He sank onto the sofa with careful movements, wonder flooding his eyes. It was some kind of magic. Excitement exploded out of fate as he cornered Togo with rapid-fire questions. Surprise still stamped across his face as he muttered that he doubted this magic was real. They froze, certain he'd never seen anything like it. He snapped, "Can you conjure fire or summon water?" Togo's eyes went blank. He couldn't, shock freezing him to the spot. He, intrigued by the idea of magic in this world, watched wonder curdle into bitter disappointment. People who couldn't wield magic were practically legends here. Spotting one felt like catching a ghost. He threw himself back, defeat flooding him as a brutal truth crashed in. He might not even have the basic skills for this. That night he tossed and turned, sleep refusing him as the presence of others crowded his mind and set his skin on edge. He snatched his sketchbook, desperate to draw Faye, then yanked his hand back and sketched a lone carrot as his eyes burned toward the distant horizon. His breath hitched as a Pegasus, and unicorns grazed outside. Poachers haunted his every step, and he desperately hoped the threat would be gone soon. Until dawn, fate hung her head and gleefully devoured carrots alone, raving about every sweet bite as she shared them with enchanting horses. Togo sliced carrots as curiosity ignited over the fake spirit everyone wouldn't stop talking about. Face froze, weighing every word like a blade before he spoke. She insisted spirits aren't human or animal, they're something else entirely. He dared suggest they could be magic incarnate. They swore spirits dwelled in the forests and at the springs, fierce guardians who shielded the natural world. Most kept everyone at arm's length. A handful, though, would slip from the shadows and step in for the people they cared about. They danced with mischievous grace and surged with raw power, whispered to possess an otherworldly beauty. These spirits were anything but ordinary. As the sun vaulted higher, Faye braced to depart and thanked him, her voice blazing with gratitude for his kindness. He swore he'd hunt down the poachers and protect the horses, then stood and watched him stride away. His memory snapped to the face of the first person he'd met in this world. Suddenly, a massive bird dive-bombed the spring, a piece of paper clenched in its beak. The bird dropped a letter at his feet. Its incomprehensible script blasted his mind with confusion, and he snatched it up and hid it. Togo bundled up, bracing for whatever came next, but the unicorn had other plans and catapulted him onto the Pegasus's back. He barely had time to object before the Pegasus exploded out of the dense forest, streaking by at breakneck speed. Tension crackled through the trip as Togo clung on, his heart hammering with fear and confusion. When Pegasus finally slammed to a halt, relief exploded, then instantly curdled into bone-deep horror. Before him loomed a grisly scene. Several Pegasi lay bound, their great wings cruelly clipped and their bodies lacerated and bleeding. Nearby, the poachers crowed, brazenly flaunting their prize catch. The poachers were already scheming to hawk the wings for a king's ransom. He stood rooted to the spot, hands trembling as the full force of cruelty slammed into him. Suddenly, a Pegasus that had flown him here and dumped him swooped back in. He stormed straight into the poachers' line of sight. Greedy grins split their faces as the thought of capturing another Pegasus set their blood racing. The horse darted through them with jaw-dropping agility, dodging every attack and keeping them chasing it. Togo hung back at a distance, eyes razor-sharp as he scanned the scene, desperate to piece together what was unfolding. He couldn't shake the question, why had Pegasus summoned him here and why had it materialized now? Suddenly he realized Pegasus was faltering and crying out for his help. Fear slammed into Togo, but he shoved it aside, snatched a pencil and notebook, and plunged into furious drawing. He could mend wounded horses with a single touch, but the true menace came from the poachers. They'd already captured Pegasus and were readying blades to sever his wings. The horse raged, crushing Togo beneath its weight, and he stared at his trembling hands as dread tightened its grip. He attacked the paper with his pencil, sketching feverishly until he laid down the final stroke and finished the drawing. They lashed the poacher tight, his hands and feet cinched so he couldn't move, and soon the sketch leapt off the page into reality. Ropes materialized and whipped around the poachers just as he had imagined, coiling tight. The poachers froze, bewildered by the sudden restraints. Togo tore through the chaos to the wounded horses and vowed to heal every last one. One poacher roared at him, fury searing through every word. Irritation flaring, Togo brushed off the furious outburst and, flanked by 3 Pegasi, stormed deeper into the forest. To dodge poachers, they vanished into a hidden clearing where Togo sprang into action. He flipped open his sketchbook, hands trembling with fierce resolve as he began to draw. The first picture leapt off the page, restoring one Pegasus to full strength, mending its wings and wrapping its wounds in neat bandages. Though the effort devoured his strength, every ounce slid away like water down a drain pipe. He's not finished, 2 Pegasi are counting on him. He sucked in a jagged breath and ripped both free in one lightning-fast motion. He snatched the pencil and the sketch sprang to flawless life. 2 majestic beings shot upright, completely healed. Relief crashed over him, then a sudden, unfamiliar pain detonated in his chest, like an invisible hand squeezing his heart. He doubled over, gasping, mind a fog and his knees buckling. It went from bad to worse. The free poachers surged at him, vengeance blazing in their eyes. Pegasus charged forward to shield him, and its ironclad loyalty only inflamed the poacher's ravenous greed. Mock Togo, the poacher, leaned in and hissed that the boy who could control the Pegasus would fetch a fortune, a heartbeat before they could lay hands on him. Thunderous strike sent the head poacher crashing to the ground. The fairy stormed in, fury blazing around him, and his hawk-like gaze exposed the poacher's cruelty. He steeled himself to confront the other hunters, but whipped around to check on that. White-hot agony exploded through Togo, ripping every sound from his throat. He suddenly collapsed, darkness swallowing him. Tai froze, confusion flashing across his face as he couldn't make sense of what had happened. Sensation crawled back into Togo bit by bit. He pried his eyes open and found himself in the familiar bed of his small house. Through the window he froze. Dozens of horses stood outside, their anxiety crackling in the air. They weren't lone beasts. Pegasi and unicorns, nearly all of them, ringed his house as if they'd been waiting for him forever. He grew fiercely attached to them, and warmth flooded his heart. Weakness gnawing at him, he clawed himself to his feet and braced against the wall to keep from collapsing. He burst the door open to find Faye on the balcony, anxiety written all over her face, and seeing someone waiting for him sparked a strange, fierce joy in his chest. The fairy blurted that Pegasus had swooped in and hauled Togo back after poachers nearly attacked. Best news, they cornered and arrested the poachers. Bad news, they were slapped with nothing more than an illegal entry charge. No witnesses and no solid evidence of poaching. Every accusation teetered on a single, trembling thread. Criminals swore they'd just gotten lost. His chest clenched like ice the moment the truth slammed into him. He nursed Pegasus back to life, but its severed wings had vanished. If the poachers hid them, their crime would stay buried. The thought slammed into him, regret clamping down on his chest. Relief hit the fairy like a wave. She sank to her knees and thanked the heavens that Togo and Pegasus were safe. Faye admitted, voice-breaking, that terror gripped him when Togo collapsed and lay motionless for 3 days. The thought of Togo's real estate ripped him back to the night he cast a powerful spell and suddenly saw a fairy friend. At that moment, a wiry unicorn burst into view, teetering a peach atop its bone. Bursting with gratitude for saving the horses, he bestowed the fruits of that. Starving for days, they sank their teeth into a peach, and the sweetness exploded across their tongue. The 2 eyes widened as the peach's sweetness hit him like lightning. His smile died the instant they said "poachers," and a cold, dangerous silence fell over him. With no hard proof of their crimes, hauling them in and snapping on the cuffs would have been almost impossible. The fairy leaned in with a dangerous grin and urged them to scour the black market for evidence. Unmask the poacher and the whole situation flips on its head. The Rigvard name sealed the vow. Fate itself promised it would happen. Togo, his spirit ignited by Thaye's resolve. A memory slammed into him. He snatched a crumpled sheet from his pocket and thrust it at the fairy. Her eyes shot open as she read. They froze. The letter wasn't just a note, it was irrefutable proof of a black market trade in Pegasus and unicorn feathers. A jolt of memory hit Togo. He'd received a letter from a great bird, and Faye's jaw dropped. Togo shrugged and flung out an offhand comment about a strange bird that doubled as proof. It sounded outrageously impossible. In this strange world, Faye had been stripped of surprise. Nothing could faze them now. That night, Togo slept under the stars while horses ringed him, barring his way into the house and standing silent, watchful sentinels, a tense echo of the recent events. Face tore out, clutching a letter, resolve blazing. He vowed to hunt the poachers down and drag them to justice. Togo rested beneath the twinkling night sky and froze when massive bird tracks caught his eye, unnerving, as if the bird had sensed something amiss. The bird was only the beginning. The whole world struck him as utterly alien. Months since he arrived, he's been consumed by memories of his old life on Earth. He'd probably be buried in preparatory classes, with no time left to paint. Gazing at the stars, Togo's chest tightened as a single truth slammed into him. He didn't want to go back. He pined for the teacher. 2 days later, Faye barreled back into Togo with wonderful news. He burst in, cuffed and corralled every last poacher. Faye thundered that none of it would have been possible without that and the vital pieces of evidence he dug up. Togo, convinced he didn't deserve it, recoiled from the praise and insisted the credit belonged to the horses and some strange bird, not him. His hands shook as he choked out that he felt worthless. Faye, refusing to let doubt take root, landed a quick, gentle slap that snapped him back. He snarled at Toza. Without him, neither Pegasus nor unicorn, not even that strange bird, would have intervened. Faye declared Togo the key and thanked him with fierce, heartfelt sincerity. Togo's cheeks burned crimson as joy spilled across his face. Turning to thank him, Faye's gaze snapped to his sketchbook. Picture how the Faye's bracelet's design revealed itself. He blurted that he painted not from desire but because beauty gripped him, and the fairy fell silent, brow knitting as she pondered. If Togo could breathe life into anything he truly desired with a single sketch, what would he draw? Faye resolved to hand Togo something vital and demanded, "What do you want?" He faltered for a beat, then, cheeks burning, whispered a trembling plea to make the forest his home. A simple request stunned Faye. He burst into genuine laughter and swore he'd discuss it with his parents. The conversation swung back to Togo's drawings and, in a flash, sparked an idea that flipped their whole way of thinking. With a single stroke, his sketches leapt off the page and became roaring beasts. Togo's brow knotted in confusion as he snapped, "What are summoned beings?" Fairies proclaimed they were magical beings bound to humans by contracts. They turn the tide in battle, haul loads during transportation, and tackle everyday tasks without missing a beat. Those bonds demanded perfect resonance and razor-sharp arcane mastery. The fairy declared that while dragons still roamed the skies, many species had vanished. The moment someone said dragons, Togo's eyes ignited with blazing excitement. Face thundered with pride, telling how the Redguard family's first generation forged a pact with the legendary Red Dragon, a tale most could only imagine. Togo scoffed at the idea of owning a dragon. His hand itched to sketch one, and his eyes ignited with a brand new dream. Faye seized To's crackling enthusiasm, couldn't quite read him, but realized he wanted to draw dragons more than to have one. A few days later, a brutal downpour hammered the forest, drenching everything in its path, while beneath the rain a band of cloaked figures slipped between the trees, their leader clutching a pendant that pulsed with a cold, eerie glow. Togo huddled beneath the eaves of his tiny house, spellbound as the rain, his first taste of it in this world, drummed a thunderous rhythm on the roof. Tom hung in the air, then they burst in, soaked to the bone. When Fade's tears finally dried, he blinked and caught sight of something strange. Each horse was now sporting a tiny drum, and Togo grinned, saying he'd painted them himself. Togo snapped, demanding why Faye had braved the storm. Faye owned up, urgent business waited just nearby. The rain hammered the world, so they planted their feet and stayed. Settling in for the night, Faye glowed with admiration. Togo had painted another guest room and outfitted it with an impossibly comfortable bed. Bone-weary, Fate toppled into a sudden doze, mumbling that he doesn't like getting wet in the rain. He stood on the balcony, savoring the calm, bell-clear hush as rain stitched the air while he pondered how generosity grows, little by little. Even with his life a non-stop storm, Faye always carved out time to visit. The fairy thrust a stamped, formal letter into Togo's hands, officially recognizing him as a resident of the forest. Togo had almost no clue about Faye. Faye was a nobleman solely because his family lorded over the region. If that's true, how did he waltz in like it was nothing? Togo's mind roared as the memory of him single-handedly taking down the Poachers slammed into him. Night's silence erupted when the horses outside unleashed frantic neighs, their cries ripping through the calm. His heart slammed against his ribs as a cloaked group closed in, led by a man wearing a pendant, and everything erupted in an instant. He crushed the pendant and wrenched a massive snake from the water, hissing with raw menace. He froze, terror pinning him motionless before the colossal serpent. With one savage swish of its tail, it whipped up a razor-sharp wave of water that hammered the horse's stable into splinters. Frantic neighs burst from the horses, and Togo's blood ran cold. This was the summoned beast Faye had spoken of. The man with the pendant's voice tore through the rain, hailing him who bent Pegasus and the unicorns to his will, and calling him utterly unmatched. He shoved their compliments aside and barked, "What do you want from my troops?" Shock slammed into him as he unearthed his true purpose. Fade, the Regord family's second son. Togo's mind raced and he blurted, Faye wasn't there. The snake's coils snapped tight around him, squeezing the air from his lungs. The pendant wearer grinned and swore they could feel a Faye's presence. He hurled another bluff, shouting that Faye had already gone, and the snake's coils squeezed even tighter. The cloaked man sneered, taunting that the regular guards didn't trust him and that true loyalty wouldn't dare hide its whereabouts during the phase. The unicorn thundered at the snake, horn a blazing lance, but every strike dissolved, sliding off as if it were striking water. Thoughts of that barreled through him as the man with the pendant picked at his fears and doubts, hunting for a way to break him. Boxed in under the crushing coils of water snakes, Togo clawed for air as interrogators hammered him for answers, but he clamped his mouth shut and gave no hint about Faye, every breath a flood that threatened to drown him. Bayesthood braced himself fearless and bellowed at the man to release Togo, while tension crackled around Faye. His true goal burned steady. A sudden racket outside snapped him awake and he blasted into the night to face the culprits. A hooded man leaned in and taunted him, cackling with malice while the others spat threats, vowing to make his life hell. Eye to eye with Thunder, alongside Pegasus, a unicorn, and a forest spirit, he vowed to shield him from any harm. He barked a laugh and shoved the warning about the phase aside. He sneered at the fairy, goading him to skip senseless fights and hurl his weapon aside, crowing that the rain had made it useless. Toga gaped, breath caught, as Faye slipped his pendant off with unnerving calm. He flung earrings and bracelets into the nearest source. He kept his cool like a loaded spring, every careful move telegraphing a hidden plan as he agreed to go with the man to secure Toho's freedom. He agreed with a cool grin before anyone could blink. His cunning exploded into the open. In an instant, the water snake exploded forward, fangs sinking into Togo and Faye in a single savage strike. The creature struck in a heartbeat, swallowing them into its watery body before they could react, and inside they choked and suffocated. Their energy bled away as shadows swallowed their vision. He felt himself yanked onward, and the teacher loomed up, demanding, "Are you still passionate about art even in a moment like this?" The teacher's words dropped like a riddle, and before he could even grasp them, he shot awake with his hands and feet tightly bound. Dazed and reeling, Togo scanned the scene and his eyes slammed onto Faye, collapsed and unconscious just a few paces away. He bellowed alarm until the face twitched. Their first move was to check Togo. Seeing him unharmed ignited a surge of relief that vanished in an instant. A hooded figure and his allies ambushed them, shackling and dragging them into captivity. Faye's eyes flared with a silent fury when the reality of their situation struck him. Guilt choking him, he spat out an apology to Toga and owned up that Blaine had dragged him in. He scoffed, pointing out the group was probably tied to the poachers who'd ambushed him before, and snarled that he was already in the thick of the fight. Everything hinged on the true Faye's identity. Faye drew a sharp breath and dove into her explanation. Togo's hunch hit the mark. The hooded figures were running with poachers who sold plundered Pegasi feathers and unicorn horns on the black market. Unmasked and watching their racket teeter, the poachers snapped and surged forward, hell-bent on revenge. Faye, their prime mark, had slipped through their grasp for days, then he came face to face with him. The fairy darted into Togo's house and claimed it as her refuge. Crushing disappointment poured through me. I'd been betrayed by my own limitations. He didn't own that strength. Every ounce roared to life through the beings he summoned. He hurled his accessories into the fire spirit's spring house. The rain slammed down, drowning their efforts and rendering them powerless. Without magic or physical strength, Faye slammed the truth to those. In their world, going magicless was almost unheard of. He joined the ranks of the unlucky. Since childhood, magic eluded him, and swords refused to obey his hands. Because of that, everyone wrote him off as a nobody. Togo tried to psych himself up, words dying on his tongue as Faye Nault drew a knife from his boot. Julia swore she'd strip their robes off him and off that one. The ropes were cut, but the locked room still refused to give them any way out. The fairy pleaded with Togo to draw and craft a key, but his hands were empty of tools and he had no clear image of its shape, so Togo doubted it could be done. Cornered, Faye forced out his last feeble firefighter spark. They hurled a searing blast of magic at the lock, trying to melt it. Tension carved his features and he let more slip. He carried the Rigvard name, born of a line of legendary dragon tamers, and their dragon-emblazoned crest shouted greatness. The dragon shrugged off both his father and brother, leaving their legacy a hollow echo. He played the helpless fool but swore he'd never stop fighting. Footsteps closed in, freezing them in their tracks, and Faye slid the knife into Togo's bell. When the tripod figures burst into the room, they locked onto the scattered mess and coiled ropes. They dragged Faye into the interrogation room and ripped into her, dangling her release like bait for every answer. When he reached to open the cell, the scalding lock seared his hand and he howled in pain. Faye plotted his escape, then unleashed a sudden eruption of fire magic that tore through the bars in a blazing explosion. Faye's kick slammed into one of the men, sending him flying off his feet. Amid the chaos, Faye snatched the keys, ripped himself free, and braced to smash his way out into the open. He stumbled as he left the cell, and a razor-sharp blade sliced into his abdomen. Blood gushed from the deep wound, painting the floor crimson as Togo froze in stunned silence. The danger was far from over. A titanic water serpent surges from the waves, smashing toward the fairy, blood-drained and too weak to dodge. The fairy slammed into her crushing rings, her fangs sinking into him, a deliberate attack. The pendant-clad commander orchestrated the assault, ordering his men to hold their blows. He wanted the man kept alive for now. He spared Faye's life. Faye was the linchpin of his plans. Togo vowed they'd spare him if he didn't fight back. They already eyed him as a potential asset. He watched as the beaten, bloodied Faye were dragged away, terror chaining him to the spot. Togo sank to the cell floor, his head spinning and fear pinning him in place. He wouldn't fight or risk any pain. He clung to safety, spurning every fight. The teacher's voice ripped through my thoughts. You will not stop painting, even on the brink of death. His hands trembled as those encouraging words, and that warm smile crashed back into him. A fierce ember exploded in his chest and refused to let him back down. Jaw clenched, he snatched the Faye's blood from the floor and began to draw. Every stroke hurled a gauntlet at despair, a raw cry that he could still forge the impossible. Dreaming cost him nothing. Blood gushed out faster than anyone could stop it. Crushed by despair, he snatched the knife Faye had left him. Without hesitation, he sliced his arm. Pain exploded and smeared his vision, but he pressed on. The drawing had to be finished. His teacher had been right. He couldn't stop no matter the cost. With his last ounce of strength, he forced the final strokes and finished the image. The brave red dragon blazes against the blood-soaked prison floor, impossible to ignore. Without warning, a searing pain ripped through Togo's chest and cold flooded his body. Sweat streamed down his face as he snapped his head up, and the drawing had vanished, or so he thought. Towering crimson dragon loomed before him, colossal and wrapped in an eerie silence. The dragon's eyes pinned him. Togo met that stare and whispered a plea to find someone of the same color and help him, and the dragon lowered its head. If I'm right, it demands we lick his face. He rocketed into the sky, and the dragon spotted a water serpent lashing at the fairy. The snake blasted glassy water spheres with lethal, pinpoint accuracy. The red dragon bellowed back, fire ripping from its throat. He tore the waters apart and set the serpent ablaze, leaving it a charred, lifeless husk. In the dark torture chamber, the weak, bewildered fairy flinched as the thunderous rumble of battle rolled through the air. The dragon smashed through the wall and froze, breath snagging, then recognition hit. The creature before it was a red dragon, the sacred emblem of its bloodline. Face gaped, eyes wide, and refusing to accept the impossible unfolding before him. Togo staggered back into the cell, ghostly pale and utterly exhausted, then let out a quiet laugh. Even now, as his body betrayed him, he realized drawing, even in his darkest hour, had never ignited a joy this fierce. His eyes slowly peeled open, fog choking his thoughts. When the mist cleared, he realized he wasn't in his room. Then he saw Faye next to him, battered and scarred but flashing a warm smile. Blood still soaked through her bandages, and relieved he had woken, she asked how he was feeling. Faye hurled himself forward and swept him into a gentle embrace, ignoring his own wounds. Pressing a glass of juice into Togo's hand, they shrugged and let slip casually that they'd finally reached the Rigvard family's estate. He froze when the truth landed. Faye was a real noblewoman, but there wasn't a second to spare. Danger was closing in. Faye lost an eye, several fingers, and his ribs were shattered, but he laughed like it meant nothing and waved the pain away. He sneered, calling it a tiny price to pay to survive. He fixated on Togo's safety. Seeing the fairies so broken, Togo staggered under a tidal wave of guilt and sorrow. Faye gritted his teeth and insisted the injuries were a price he'd gladly pay as long as Togo was safe. A sly grin split the fake's face as he turned and spoke to someone, or maybe something. Newly summoned, a magnificent crimson dragon tore into reality, majestic and roaring, born straight from the blood-painted image that had saved them. Their dragon protector ripped through the black market bandits, routing them and carving a clear escape for Faye and Togo. Fate's jaw dropped, a living dragon towered before him, yet he was convinced Togo had painted it. Genuine gratitude poured from him. They stormed out of Togo, pride roaring in their chests and confusion knotting their thoughts. They douse and scrub the dragon, and he suddenly looks tiny. Faye dropped the bomb. His magic couldn't hold him at full size, but he vowed they'd fix it later. Until the truth slammed into him and everything snapped into place. Two officials strode into the room. One was Vanilla Redguard, the man who sired Lord Territory. Another emerged, Rosetta Rufus Rigord, his older brother. Terror rooted him to the spot. He couldn't move and couldn't fathom why the nobles had come to him. Rosetta snapped him back in a heartbeat, thanked him for saving Faye, and owned up to her reckless antics. He recoiled from their gratitude, certain he didn't deserve it after all they'd sacrificed for him. Faye's father barked that Faye's wounds were a badge of honor and that a scar or two meant nothing compared to saving a life. The nobles weren't angry, relief crashed over them, and gratitude flared the moment they realized he was also alive. Open gratitude was foreign to him, and its warmth surged through his chest like a pleasant tide he never knew he needed. A brief reprieve shattered, he crashed, desperate for rest after 10 days unconscious. Now I knew why his limbs dragged like blocks of lead. A few days later, Togo summoned every scrap of strength, hauled himself to his feet, and moved again. Confidence burned in his hands, and he ached to sprint back into the forest and start painting. Before he could step away, Faye's bracelet and pendant erupted in a shower of sparks, and two wolves of living flame tore into being. Faye grinned and introduced them as his summoned beasts. With Togo sprawled unconscious, Faye ripped back to the source and snatched up his belongings. He rounded the trees, and there they were at the forest's edge, like a kind bird had dropped them at his feet. He whooped in triumph and vowed that if their paths ever crossed again, he'd personally thank the bird. They stormed into the forest astride the Faye's flame wolves. When they reached the house of him, it stood miraculously unscathed. Horses grazed nearby. The instant they spotted him, they erupted into a thundering charge. They whinnied and burrowed their warm muzzles against him like old friends reunited, brimming with joy. Their faces lit with smiles as they watched the touching meeting. Soon they rose, clustered together, and drifted toward the exit. Before he could react, Togo insisted on painting a portrait of the face inside the house. Face perched on the chair, nerves buzzing as Togo's stare pinned him, and he laughed, joking it'd be better if Togo had painted him before the injuries. Togo vowed every word sharp that this would be the first portrait he'd paint the moment he returned home. While Togo worked, curiosity clawed at him and he snatched a quick look at the sketch. His jaw dropped as the drawing stared back a whole, unscathed version of him. No cuts, no blood, nothing like the wounded face he actually wore. The fairy froze, jaw-dropping, as Togo poured his art into a blazing attempt to heal him. Togo confirmed it, declaring that if his drawings could breathe life back into horses, they'd do the same for Faye. They shot to their feet, snatched up paper and a pen, and began furiously scrawling a letter. He summoned his firebird and snapped that he'd ordered medicine to restore his fingers. Nothing for his eye, he'd cancelled that order. Trusting that one to heal him, he sent a blunt letter to his parents declaring he'd stopped seeing him. He trusted him's talent with unshakable conviction. Trust lit a fire in him. He poured every ounce of himself into the drawing and toiled from morning till night. He ripped the portrait to life with his brush. The next day, a savage creative block slammed into him. I wrestled with every hue. One wrong choice could snuff the portrait's spark or set it blazing with life. Faye called him again and again, but Togo gave no answer. Work had utterly swallowed him. Out of nowhere, a crimson dragon erupted into view beside their house. Flushed and stammering, the fairy admitted he'd told the dragon to stay away, but the dragon thundered in anyway. He gaped at the dragon in stunned disbelief, then exploded into an awed cry. The dragon's scale pulsed a perfect crimson made for Faye's eyes, igniting Togo to grind it into paint. He painted at a furious pace, and when he stepped back, the portrait exploded with vivid color and pulsed with life. The instant the final stroke landed, a raw surge of power tore through Faye and the spent Togo crumpled to the ground. Togo's unleashed magic siphoned every ounce of his strength, leaving him hollow, and it slammed into them with a shock they'd never felt before. Togo jolted awake in the hammock, squinting as sunlight filtered through the trees, and Faye stood close by, beaming as she greeted him warmly. The fairy stood before him, completely healed, and relief slammed into him. He felt lighter, like a heavy burden had been ripped from his shoulders. The fairy pointed at the nearby Pegasus and Unicorn. Their magic flooded into that with startling ease, likely because his natural bond with them opened the way. Before Togo could fully grasp it, Faye yanked him to one of his firewalls. He demanded they go together to his family's house, and Faye ripped the last threads of formality between them. He erupted into laughter and snapped at Togo, "Stop calling me the Red Pumpkin." They stared death in the eye side by side, so Faye and Togo's sister shrugged off all formalities and called him by his name. He froze, then hurled Faye's name into the air, the first time he'd ever called someone best friend, and the words slammed into him, electric and oddly comforting. On the way to Rigvard's estate, Faye's thoughts blazed as she remembered how everything flipped the moment the red dragon became his summoned beast. Faye'd watched dreams that once seemed impossible explode into reality. He finally had someone he could fully trust, that one. Gratitude roared in his chest for their friendship. The conversation snapped into focus when Faye planted the idea that Togo should paint a portrait of his family. Fozzie watched his portraits vanish and his wounds fade with them, and he burned for a new portrait to mark the moment. A bolt of memory jolted Togo, the old world's joy of painting and his teacher's smile, and he grinned, saying yes, because this wasn't just a simple favor but a chance to create something special for a new friend. Togo and Faye pulled up to the Grand Regard estate, where Faye's father and brother threw open their arms and welcomed them with warm, beaming smiles. Rosetta and her father tore open the letter, saw Togo suggest painting a family portrait, and felt their hearts swell with admiration. His full recovery blew his family away and filled them with breathless joy, another unexpected miracle. The breakfast table groaned under crispy, cloud-soft bread, gleaming jars of jam, sizzling sausages, and creamy stuffed eggs, and for him this spread stole his breath like nothing before. Satisfaction lit up his face as he grinned and goaded him to eat more. His gaze snapped to Togo. Had he always eaten this little? Faye blurted that Togo often forgot to eat whenever he plunged into his drawings. He sometimes survived on a single fruit, driven by a fierce devotion to the art of Saint Togo. Fozzie's father dropped a bombshell, offering Togo the role of the Rigvard family's exclusive, contracted artist. Faye thundered that it translates into a generous salary to cover living expenses. Funds fueled the activities, and painting commissions piled up. A lifeline opened. He could move in with his family so they could watch over him and keep him safe. A once-in-a-lifetime opening flashed before him, and Togo froze. For years he dreamed of turning his art into a career, but the mere thought of doing it froze him with fear. Later, sitting alone by the fountain, Togo felt a tidal wave of painful memories slam into him again. He replayed the rain-lashed night. Soaked to the bone, he staggered up to his teacher's house. His teacher's eyes snapped open as she shoved a warm drink and a towel into his hands, worry etched across her face. He said that his family stormed in and dumped every one of his drawing supplies into the trash the moment he proudly announced his success in our class. Togo's works at the exhibition stole the show and earned glowing reviews. His teacher insisted he enroll in art school. His family branded his passion pointless, crushing the spark of his enthusiasm. The teacher, eyes blazing with a different point of view, countered that not all waste is bad, some of it can be turned into value. He described aimless acts wandering through the rain that feel like wasted time yet suddenly yield startling rewards. I cut through quiet streets, rain glittering in lantern light, wet sleeves clinging to my skin. It might all look pointless. Soul-feeding experiences, scorned by society, ignite the heart. The teacher laid a steady palm on the one's chest, felt the heart's hungry rhythm, and urged him to take care of it. Toga sank into a trance as memories of his past crashed through his mind in sharp, flickering flashes. A sudden figure burst into view, jolting Togo sitting alone in the yard, sunk in thought right out of his reverie. She'd scoured every corner for him, curiosity clawed at her, and she blurted a strange question. Maybe he refused to touch art because Togo's paintings burst from their frames and came alive. Simon from Togo snapped his mouth shut, locking away the true reason for his reluctance. He swallowed his words, snapped a curt nod, and played along as if the Fae's guest was right. Fairy exhaled a soft, relieved laugh and shrugged it off as a childhood problem. What crises can be resolved when you strike fast with early intervention? Confusion slammed into Togo, then it hit him. Fae wasn't speaking literally. She warned his magic was seeping out of him. He summoned his paintings into reality and urged magic training as the solution. He was electrified by the thought of painting without his creations springing to life. He plunged into training with Fae, eagerness crackling through every move. Step 1: Lock eyes with the magic. They thrust the staff's top, crowned with a glowing crystal, into his hands, the starter tool every beginner clutches. Togo seized the crystal and it exploded into color, a ribbon of light sprinting down his arm before dying on his wrist. The fairy unveiled the staff's power. It ripped open the veil so you could stare at magic's pulsing currents. It ignites in the hands and, through relentless practice, surges into every bone and muscle. Sensing the phase's hint, Togo snapped his eyes shut as a crackling current of magic surged through him and braided itself around his body. The discovery gripped him, igniting a fierce urge to push his training even further. That night, Togo slipped back into secret practice, astonished as a raw magic surged through him, far stronger than he was. Morning hits and he and Fae are back in the yard, pushing through another ruthless session to lock their magic tight and stop it from leaking. The fairy slammed a short stick into Togo's palm and barked that he must stop her light from ever turning on. The tasks looked simple. Madness clawed at Togo as he fought to hold a curtain against a howling wind. The fairy lunged, seized him by the wrist, clamped down on the surging magic and roared, "Don't you dare give up." Pressure swelled until Togo trembled, a raw cry ripping from his throat as the overload slammed him. Spent and seething, he lost control. A blinding flash lit the sky like noon, and the wand exploded into splinters in his hands. Togo and Faced frozen reel back, eyes wide. Could that really be a Fae from Rygrin? They realized taming that colossal magic would be far harder than they expected, and his power crashed over them like a living storm. The long-dormant magic ripped free without warning, throwing the household rigor into a panic and forcing the family to scramble for a doctor. They scrambled to contain explosive magical outbursts erupting from people who'd never had powers before. The father and brother waited, hearts hammering, forcing a calm front as the doctor examined Togo. He buried his extraterrestrial origin beneath a flawless human mask. A secret locked tight by the records and whispered only to a handful of trusted beings. During the exam, the doctor leaned in and pressed, "Had you read a forbidden spell, crossed paths with a spirit, or been studying advanced magic?" The outbreak erupted. Togo hesitated and shook his head. The doctor and assistant's eyes screamed he'd just endured danger, wounds, illness, or monsters. Togo faltered, stammered a protest, locked eyes with Fae, and she pressed a finger to her lips to hush him. The doctor unleashed a relentless barrage of tests across Togo. He checked his pulse, then suddenly gripped a magic wand and clasped a strange, compass-shaped necklace around his neck. Tension crackled through the room, everyone leaned in, eyes locked on the results, bracing for the worst. The doctor gasped. Togo's magic had surged so rapidly, it now stood toe-to-toe with the court magicians. The doctor declared Togo's surging magic a natural, perfectly understandable phenomenon. His magic flared a brilliant color, revealing he could control various elements. Wide-eyed, the doctor implored Togo to race to the capital for deeper examinations and a shot at joining the royal mages. The idea hit Gogo like a lightning bolt. His father, calm and composed, smiled and politely refused. He refused to rush Togo. He needed time to adjust to the sudden magical surge, and hauling him to the capital would only fan the flames. Disappointment flared, but the doctor and his assistant choked it down and respected the choice. Equip him with a special sealing tool, a magic dampener, to rein in his runaway powers. Faye cracked a joke to cut the tension, but worry roared beneath his smile. He was clearly worried about Togo. The next day, panic ripped through everyone when Togo's sealing tool buckled beneath his colossal magic and shattered. The doctor snapped. Use sealing tools carved from the magic stone. Universal stones pulsed with raw magic, able to perform tasks. Imagine lamps or houses that conjure the exact creatures Faye called forth with her earrings to guard her animals. After the doctor left, Faye barked that they seize one of the stones immediately, while Togo stalled, doubt curling in his gut. Confusion slammed into him, but Rose brushed off his worry, declaring that Togo's actions had ended the poacher crisis and saved Faye. I won the Reg Guard family's fierce gratitude, and they threw open their coffers to bankroll me. Togo hatched a daring plan and bypassed the regular guards. He snatched his notebook and sketched a dazzling gemstone with frantic strokes. Every jaw dropped as it burst out of the page. The father and brother froze, jaws dropping. They'd never seen magic like this before. Their astonishment exploded as a crimson dragon slammed through the window, pulled irresistibly by the gemstone's pulsing, thunderous magical aura. The mischievous fairy tossed out that Togo could become the world's greatest jeweler. When the dragon's eyes gleamed with admiration, Togo leapt in and offered to craft a custom gem just for him. The fairy agreed in a heartbeat, and Togo's hand sailed over the paper, calmly sketching the entire red dragon as he hummed a soft, delighted tune. The blood-red gem snapped into existence, blazing with raw, crackling magic. The dragon shoved him hard. Then unmake your body and pour your essence into the stone's cold heart. He conjured a cozy new home they could summon at any moment, and they beamed, showering him with warm thanks. Dad snapped that the jewel was probably worth more than their entire estate. He shrugged and swallowed the urge to ask how much the precious stone was worth. He poured everything into creations to spark joy, especially for the red dragon he felt an unshakable bond with. Togo's mind raced. Could selling his enchanted gems be enough to keep him afloat? The fairy gasped, calling it Togo's decision, and pointed out he could earn far more than mere survival. He vowed to start small, snatching up only the essentials, just the groceries to keep him going. Why paint everything if it meant nothing? He craved variety in their life, and they planned to dive into the city the next day. Tempers flared as the father and brother clashed over who would accompany Togo, while looming work commitments threatened to torpedo the obvious choice. Next morning, Togo sprang up, pried 3 stones free, and set them out to sell. Hold back. Flooding the market with pricey jewels will trip every alarm and make you look blatantly suspicious. I burst into Amelia, a lively town where children's laughter rang through the streets and friendly chatter buzzed from every corner. The scene's electric buzz hooked him. He lunged to seize every vivid detail. Fever of curiosity seized him the moment they described the intricate patterns. Runes cut into every wall and alley across the city, pulsing with fierce protective magic. Trace the sigils with simple enchanted powder, embed a magic stone at the center, and a shimmering protective ward flares to life. In this world, enchanted stones fueled every spell. No sorcerer could summon power without one. They kicked things off at a jewelry store, its facade emblazoned with a proud noble crest. The shop owner spots the Fozzie family, beams, and rushes over to greet them like old friends. Fade shrugged and said offhand they were heading out to snag a Togo tool for the ceiling. It could be fitted with a magic stone and had to be tested. And Togo slid one of his stones forward for appraisal, the seller. After a relentless full-spectrum scan with cutting-edge instruments, his jaw dropped as he proclaimed it a masterpiece so breathtaking it could lure a dragon from the skies. He scrawled the value and walked away, clueless he'd just stumbled onto a fortune. Gasfei's pulse jumped. This would sustain comfortable living for 2 to 3 years. The fairy's breath caught. Togo's magic stones were typically glittering luxuries reserved for the nobility. Spoon poised over rice pudding, he confessed some beasts gobbled them in an instant. Magic never ran in him, so he bought his powers with cold, hard coin. Later, they wove through the city's bustling streets, stocked up on groceries, and dove into a local cafe to devour a hot meal. When he sank his teeth into his first meat sandwich, flavor exploded across his mouth and seared itself into his memory. He grinned, rapture flooding him as he tore into the fragrant bread and juicy meat. Faye beamed, dragging everyone through the city's culinary wonders, thrilled to share every bite because practicality ran in her veins. The fairy flashed a wicked grin and proposed a complete wardrobe makeover for Togo. He grinned and quipped that his current outfit looked hopelessly outdated. He realized his clothes were cobbled from the feathers of a giant bird and decided they should go buy new clothes. At the Togo clothing store, he tore through racks, trying on style after style until he emerged rocking a bold new look, then pushed into the herb shop. Faye, ever the social spark, wove through the food kiosks, traded jokes with locals, and thrilled the children by unleashing his summoned beast. A grin ripped across his face, and shockingly it calmed Togo. Togo strode home that evening, the whole day humming with bright, contagious cheer. A shadowy building yanked his gaze, he asked, and fate grinned, naming it the Slaw Dating Agency. Togo froze, breath snatched away, as the forger leaned in and revealed this slavery was nothing like anything he'd ever seen. A lifeline for the poor, throwing open its doors for shelter, dishing out warm meals, and carving a straight path to freedom. Curiosity surged in Togo, so Faye flashed a grin and urged him to check it out a little later. The house swarmed with people, but a lone figure at the far end blazed into focus, stealing every eye. The mountain of a man, thick beard and a web of scars, radiated a quiet, razor-sharp focus. The next day, Flaminia Togo's mind was on fire as she wrestled with the idea of slavery. They leaned in and swore it was legal, insisting ironclad rules watched every move. Moments later, they thundered up to the slot introduction agency. "We're a raucous old manager, let's greet them with a thunderous, heartwarming roar." Faye declared Togum needed a caretaker and a friend, and it hit the manager like a punch. Faye rarely called anyone a close friend. The old man burst forward, eager to champion the Slavs, starting with their formidable women. Confusion knotted his gut, his cheeks flamed scarlet, and he squirmed under their stares. The harem was the last thing he wanted. Fate sneered as he let the one shot at a decent caregiver slip through his fingers. Toga's voice hardened. "I can't be at ease around someone like that." The manager lunged in, hawking mature women to anyone who would listen. Young men and even children stepped up, none proved suitable for him. The impatient fairy snapped, asking to see the other options, and they delved into the agency's deeper sections. They barreled past the cameras with a pack of wild, rough-looking people. Faye warned, "This is the criminals' sector, dangerous people caged behind heavy iron bars." Composure unshaken, he strode to the outermost cell. A towering man, his beard like a grizzly's and his skin crisscrossed with scars, fixed them with eyes that cut like blades. Togo skidded to a stop before the camera and locked eyes with the man, admiration blazing in his gaze. He declared she was utterly spellbound. A jolt of worry slammed into the fairy. Could he really be serious? Alarm bells blasted in my head, the man screamed danger. Relentless, he ignored the man's past and fixated on his body, picturing it as the flawless model for a plaster statue in every drawing. They pleaded with Togo, insisting the woman was a model. Togo froze and flat-out refused, too awkward to thoroughly dig into whether you knew the form, yet a sudden flash of enthusiasm from him stunned Faye. He stepped forward and tried to talk to him again, insisting this man wasn't a caretaker but a hardened killer, and the man proved it by flashing his badge. Across more than 10 years, 2 murders spawned 7 sales, and all he can do is fight and survive. Togo, mesmerized by the man's sculpted physique, holds his ground and regards him not as a criminal but as a flawless, living work of art. Like a living statue, he froze as the fairy launched one last desperate plea to dissuade him. She begged, but he slammed his ears shut and brazenly lied that the man had never been dangerous. To him, this man was the spark that ignited everything inside. They hissed incredulous whispers about that's bizarre tastes and surrendered. Even the manager, stunned by the choice, signs off and seals the deal. The Togo sprinted off alongside his first guardian. Once a prisoner, forged in combat and scarred to the bone, he stood battle-hardened and dangerously unprepared for what lurked ahead. Later, at the Grand Regard estate, a slow-burning curiosity crept through the halls. He wondered why Togo didn't pick another Slavic person, and the decision set his blood boiling. He zeroed in single-minded, only that man would do. The fairy leaned in, voice low and urgent, and revealed the strange reason. He was a slave, his wrist encircled by a cold metal bracelet that marked him a criminal. Togo held his composure as a crisply dressed man strode in, hair neatly combed and clean-shaven, his new look commanding the room. His hulking frame looked chiseled from marble, a living Hercules or Leocan. Togo bounded forward, grinned wide, and fired. "What's your name?" He reached for it and shock slammed into him. It was gone. The fairy caught the hint like a flare. The man wanted his past locked away. And they tossed the idea at Togo, let him name him instead. In an instant, the man's regal silhouette ignited a fierce surge of inspiration. He christened himself Leo Coles, and, to his surprise, the man liked it. After meeting Togo and Leo Coles, they burst into the forest to kick off the borrowing stage and called the beasts to join them on the journey. They rounded the bend and finally stood before Togo's secluded house, cocooned in the hush of the surrounding wild. Leo Coles gaped as wild Pegasi soared and unicorns thundered across the plains, not summoned constructs, but the living beasts he'd healed and befriended. Leo threw open the door and insisted he take the guest room. He slammed the offer away. He refused to live under the same roof as a landlord marked by a criminal past. Togo quelled his panic by slamming a gleaming metal bracelet into view, a fail-safe that would stop Leo from causing harm or daring to contradict him. Togo pitched a separate house for Leo, a private refuge so he could feel comfortable. He flashed a grin, grabbed his pencil, and ripped into a sketch as Lee watched, completely baffled. A simple, cozy wooden house sketched on the page sprang off the paper and materialized right before them, and Leo, eyes wide, blurted, "How did that happen?" He brushed it off with a sharp flick of his hand, called it routine, and told him to get used to it. He shrugged, calling the tricks old news, and Leo, the burly former prisoner, released a heavy sigh as the truth slammed into him. His new master was anything but typical. The next morning, Togo was feverishly sketching when his wrist gadget buzzed, and a knock rattled the door. He flung the door open and found Lacroix blurting a quick "Sorry, I dozed off" while standing there, clearly waiting for trouble. He, puzzled by the thought that someone might be worried, suddenly collapsed into sleep, something he never imagined since he'd once slept for 10 days. He soothed Lacroix's fears, forged a way forward, then snapped his attention elsewhere. They yanked out a monstrous hunk of meat for their lunch. Togo fumbled with the meat, so Lacroix stepped in and his knife danced with balletic precision, each perfect slice leaving Togo spellbound. Lahoric felt that stare lock onto him like a predator's gaze and simply shrugged it off. Before long, they slapped together sandwiches and sat down to eat, while Togo bristled, knowing a meal should be eaten properly. Lacroix munched whatever was put in front of him with zero fuss, and Togo cracked a relieved grin. He silently devoured the low-key set, his mind racing through every beat of the roll. He chewed slowly, declaring his needs were simple: remind him to eat whenever he vanishes into his sketches, swap the tool on the ceiling every day. And above all, to throw himself into the role and pose as the living model for his works. He owned up he wasn't a professional artist, he painted simply because he loved it. Plates cleared, Loki flashed a wicked grin, agreed, and they dove straight into the work. In a quiet corner of the house, Loki struck a pose while Togo's pencil danced across the paper. To anyone else it looked ordinary, but for Loki it was anything but. He'd grown hardened to being branded a criminal, never seen as a friend. He bristled, unsettled by that one's casual, effortless kindness. He smothered the strange stirring and dove headfirst into his role as a slave. Loki's past deeds lit a fuse. What he set in motion will inevitably explode into reality. He gazed at the silent forest and the odd, kind man who lived there, and a restless fire lit in his chest. This life felt too different, a little unsettling. In just a few days, Togo's brushwork sharpened into something solid. Skill wasn't the problem. The real sting was that his drawings stubbornly refused to spring to life. Eruptions keep crashing in, one after another. Like when Loki suddenly barked, switched to the sealing tool. Back then, he devoured endless hours at Loki's side, a silent man who spoke only in sharp hey. He slammed the lid on that conversation, no ink spilled, honoring his Simons. At noon, while someone sketched rabbits in the meadow, the bunnies froze for a heartbeat and then melted into the grass without a sound. As Togo already devoured lunch, he shot into the house, reappeared with a sandwich, and Togo lunged forward, eagerly devouring it. A simple bread piled with meat and cheese, every bite crushed Togo's cooking. Loki leaned in, volunteering to whip up and bring lunch next time, if Togo didn't mind. Loki's routine with Togo was simple. He coaxed Togo to eat, climbed a ladder to swap the ceiling fixture, then swung an axe chopping wood in the backyard. I lugged a bucket of water. He tore into brutal training, ripping off one-arm push-ups and merciless torso lifts. Togo froze, struck by his iron discipline, and marveled at the raw strength it laid bare. Loki dismissed it with a flick of his hand and barked, "Stay alert. One wrong step, it's all it takes to unleash disaster." Next day, Tagamo had to head straight to Fozzie House. He implored the horses to help. They all lunged, scrambling to seize the task. He grabbed the beaten, gasping mount for himself, and the crowd burned with envy. The usually aloof Pegasus shocked everyone by lowering his head and letting Loki pet him, the mythical horse's unexpected friendliness flipping the moment into pure comedy. Togo and Loki barreled up to Regard's estate. Fake probed, cautious, if Loki was settling into life with Togo. Loki delivered a clipped, distant reply. Eight smarks its hunger sated. In the living room, the doctor and his assistant braced themselves, ready to launch the follow-up examination the moment he arrived. They clamped onto his wrist, hunting for a pulse, as enchanted instruments hummed and scanned him. Togo's mastery over magic surged, "So we can start stripping the sealing devices away, piece by piece." A thrill shot through the fairy as she beamed at their progress. The doctor's jaw dropped when he learned Togo had bought a slob. Convinced Loki was a guardian, the doctor gaped when Togo shrugged and revealed Loki was a model. The assistant's eyes shot open as they blurted that male models barely get hired because most clients pick women. Triumph flared in him at his decision, and fate favored her friend's strange choice. Evening fell. Togo and Loki sat down to dinner inside the Regard mansion. After dinner, Faye swept Togo into a corner and spilled the urgent plans for the royal castle party. Faye confessed it, parties aren't her thing, and she has no clue how to act at them. He, always a pillar of calm, urged everyone to rally to Faye's side. She needed support. Startled yet electrified by curiosity, the fairy poured out every detail. An official gathering crackled with nobles and important figures. It dragged the king himself from his throne. The invitation to the Fays wasn't for just any Regard, it bore the name Feyblade Regard. Her rare, supposedly extinct red dragon painted a bullseye on her back. Nobles and kings descended, hungry to claim her. They'll seize the moment, marry their daughters off as bargaining chips, or rush in to capture the dragon. Faye ripped the truth open. Togo's presence tipped the scales. He could have been her escape. If Togo's strength faltered or he needed to steal a breather, they could have weaponized Togo's commoner birth to dodge the pressure. He dove headfirst into trading, followed the step-by-step recommendations, and his participation passed muster. The catch, the event was set to kick off in just 2 days. The road to the capital devoured almost a whole day. Time's running out and trouble is closing in. Just as they were about to walk away, their eyes locked onto a crucial clue. Suit up Togo and Leo Corliss in the proper clothing, now. The next day, the trio barreled into a clothing store in Flaminia. Slipping into the clothes, Leo Corliss stepped up and asked Faye to let him join them. Gratitude washed over her, and she named Leo Corliss their guardian. Uncertainty wrapped the event in shadow. Wisdom demanded caution. Togo stepped out of the fitting room in the dress, and Faye exploded with laughter. Leo Corliss stayed, utterly fooled, mistook Togo for a woman. Bewildered, he stammered that he was a man and a living mystery, chuckling the whole time. I ripped through the misunderstanding and made things right with the seller. A few more purchases later, Togo splurged and decked himself out in decent clothes. They launched a full-on hunt for a proper formal outfit for Ryoko. Everything ready, Faye, Togo, and Leo Corliss surged toward the capital, while the ride on the creature Faye summoned crawled in grinding boredom. He drank in the fire spirit's heat rising up from beneath them. Leo Corliss leaned in, eyes flashing, and snapped at Togo, "Where were you born?" Embarrassment slammed into him as words jammed in his throat. A suspicion flared in Leo. Togo's ignorance, he'd never ridden a horse and didn't even know what a woman's dress was, betrayed his humble origins. Just as the room teetered into awkward silence, Face cut through the hush with a steady voice. Togo's new to this world, and the tension melted. The caravan moved in a calm rhythm, pausing to rest and pray as they sliced through the Meadows Mountains, and Togo beamed at the light jokes that lifted everyone's spirits. As evening bled into the sky, they arrived breathless before the royal capital's towering main gates. It eclipsed every wonder in Flaminia. Leo Corliss practically dragged Togo to every perfect sketch spot with buzzing excitement, and inspiration hit him like lightning. Inside the capital's tavern sat a living mystery. Chloe sipped wine. We were practically vibrating, counting every heartbeat down to tomorrow's royal party at the castle. A spark flared inside him. Something extraordinary was closing in. Faye, Togo, and Leo Corliss poured through the capital's massive gates, and Togo gaped, breath stolen by the city's overwhelming grandeur. The city roared to life as late shoppers swarmed the streets. Shimmering lights spun a living spell while the royal castle loomed on the horizon, towering, majestic, and untouchable. Soon the three burst through the doors of the opulent hotel Faye had booked for them, and they throw their store wide open in the room. Togo and Leo Corliss froze, jaws slack. This wasn't a room. It could have been ripped straight from a nobleman's estate. It boasts separate bedrooms, dazzles with exquisite decor, and opens into an incredibly spacious interior. Something clattered from the corridor, hinting that trouble might be coming. Doors crowded the hall, yet each room gaped into vast, echoing space. Leon fired the question everyone was dying to ask, and Face leaned in, unraveling the ancient spatial magic that stretched tiny exteriors into cavernous interiors. A key drops into each of their hands, its sigil flaring to life and branding its pattern into their palms. He strode into the room as effortlessly as a single flick of the wrist. The very next evening they donned their finest and swept into the royal castle for an important ceremony. A glittering throng of aristocrats in sumptuous finery had already gathered at the entrance, their outfits mirroring the hall's lavish splendor. The castle doors eased open and Togo stepped inside, holding his breath as a magnificent corridor unfurled before him, walls glittering with treasured artworks and intricate patterns, and his eyes snapped to one carefully chosen painting. Knights thundered into battle on pounding horses. Onlookers traced the faces and declared it the legendary image of the hero facing the Demon King. The painting's tail gripped Togo, pulling him in even deeper. The main hall doors slammed open. No time to hesitate. Fate leaned close and told him to feign illness if everything fell apart, and he nodded, every instinct screaming at the weight of what those opulent doors hid. They thundered into the grand ballroom. The room struck as sparkling chandeliers spilled a warm, golden glow across the hall. Nobles' voices crackled through the air as a masterful orchestra unleashed sweeping, cinematic music. Aristocrats in silken gowns and sharply tailored coats whirled across the marble ballroom as others sank into velvet chairs, savoring sumptuous dishes. Tobus stepped into the massive crowd for the first time, his face lighting up with electric excitement. His thoughts evaporated the instant a graceful blonde glided by for a drink. She was impossible to miss. Her lithe silhouette and radiant face stopped Togo dead. He stood spellbound, eyes locked, and when she met his gaze she flashed a warm, inviting smile. His heart pounded, his face flared crimson, and Faye caught Togo's embarrassed look. She teased that it was love at first sight. He mumbled, cheeks burning, that it could be true, only not the usual way. He said it hit him exactly like the first time he met Lilac. He blurted he was desperate to paint her, and Faye and Lilac traded baffled looks, torn between laughing and sighing. Faye ribbed Togo about his bizarre priorities, grinning because his friend was finally noticing women and might be barreling straight into love. Togo fought to tame his racing heart. A majestic voice thundered the name of the Fays. With a courtly bow, the king greeted the fairies, then pleaded for forgiveness for summoning them at the 11th hour. They answered with polished grace, but his curiosity flared. He bellowed, "Why did the king summon me instead of my father or my older brother?" The king froze mid-breath and spat out the truth. He'd been killed. He caught wind that Faye had tamed the legendary red dragon and bent it to his will as his summoned beast. A polite smile tugged at my lips as I leaned in, eager to see it with my own eyes. They slammed their hands onto the enchanted stone on his pendant, and a blinding light erupted. The legendary dragon burst into the hall, its cavernous roar detonating through the rafters and unleashing waves of astonishment that left the nobles whispering to one another in stunned disbelief. The dragon loomed calm, hulking power beside the fairy, and as the king closed the distance, its eyes snapped into razor-bright slits. It unleashed an earth-shattering rumble that rattled the room and sent the king stumbling to a halt. Fate snapped a quick apology for the dragon's reaction, then brushed it aside with one commanding flick of his pendant. Moments before it vanished, the dragon swept the room with a razor stare, hostility crackling in the air. She barely choked out another apology when the king cut her off, brushing her aside with a cold, sweeping wave. A blazing curiosity consumed him at the thought that Faye could command a legendary red dragon straight out of ancient myth. The fairy laughed off the king's glowing praise, declaring he was being handed far more credit than he deserved. The moment Faye and the Regard family had feared slammed into them, the king's polite smile curled as he proposed, declaring Faye the perfect husband for his third princess. He thundered that the alliance would steady the kingdom and breathe life back into the crown's waning power. The fairy stood ready. He offered a polite laugh and with the others shot that idea down. He blurted that the princess deserved a far better man, maybe a legendary hero, not a simple nobleman like him, as the king leaned in, intent on pressing him further. He lunged in just in time, yanking his sleeves up to shroud his face. He whispered that he was unwell, the admission slicing the silence and landing squarely in the king's ears. Feigning concern, fate pounced and seized the moment. He dropped to one knee, apologized to the king, and begged to be excused to tend the one struck by sudden illness. The king hesitated, then granted leave, and they hurried out of the hall. From the far corner of the restroom, the mysterious blonde cradling a glass of wine watched in private silence, her face a sealed, unreadable mask. Faye flashed a sly grin at Togo and declared his performance perfectly timed. Where he nodded him, he feared they'd offend the king. They sneered and spat that the king and nobles were no saints, hearts poisoned and hooked only on the red dragon. He tore open the bigger picture. The royal family, desperate to claw back power, treated the dragon as a living symbol of strength, and they saw the king's true aim. He wanted the red dragon tethered to him to seize control, not merely because of the princess. He, the father, and the brother have already sized up the dangers. He'd sooner die than let the red dragon, the pride of their families, become a political tool. Mid-conversation, the bathroom door creaked open and the blonde they'd seen earlier stepped out, ghost-pale and clutching her temple like a savage headache had seized her. Fairy snapped her head up the moment she felt Togo's stare. A majestic whisper beckoned him forward, drawing him straight to her. He shoved Togo and Togo froze, his face a mask of raw fear and gnawing doubt. Faye strode over and beamed at the woman like a true friend. They burst in, apologized for interrupting, and begged for a quick word. She shrugged and said, "Fine only if it's brief." Faye spots an opening, smirks, and playfully shoves Togo toward her. He faltered, cleared his throat on a shaky breath, then suddenly blurted out a request to have her drawn. She blinked, cocked her head, stunned by the unexpected plea. Fairy demanded that Togo explain himself. He beamed and admitted he was no professional, just an amateur artist who loved sketching. Fate shot to his feet, showered Togo with praise, and grinned, teasing that he'd one day make him his personal artist. Still trembling, Togo choked out that when he first saw her at sunset, her beauty hit him like a thunderbolt. He blurted he couldn't get her out of his head. His heart pounded as he insisted she outshone everyone. To him, she was a living masterpiece. His hand itched to fill sketchbook after sketchbook with her image. He pictured himself scouring shop after shop for days, hunting paint that matched her eyes to the exact shade, then daring to capture her in a drawing. Desire ripped through him and he couldn't help it. He blurted out that he'd fallen in love at first sight. Silence slammed into the room as his sincerity struck her. She froze, a warm blush blooming across her cheeks. She'd never met anyone like Toho. After a short pause, she fixed her gaze on her reflection and consented to be his subject, on one condition. She grinned and dropped a bombshell. Her 2-month vacation started the next day. She implored him to shelter her, and Faye and Togo stood slack-jawed, blindsided by the sudden plea. "Take her with you," she snapped. The command hit him like a punch. What did she mean? She burst out, anxiety and fury crackling in her voice as she revealed she works at the royal castle, and a relentless stalker has been trailing her. They stormed into her workplace uninvited and had towering bouquets sent straight to her desk. Someone kept tailing her, shadowing her every step. The harassment spiraled out of control, so she stepped away for 2 months. Understanding slammed into face, then a cold, sinking dread crashed over him. If this pursuer were that relentless, he'd chase her to the ends of the earth. Danger snarled at her heels, but she gambled on a trip to the territory of Regard, trusting Faye, the young heiress of Regard, to shield her. The fairy gasped. Of course, he'd already unveiled the red dragon and everyone was buzzing about it. The Redguard family seized the spotlight the moment they appeared, their jaw-dropping looks impossible to ignore. She pleaded for asylum and pledged to pose for Togo's paintings in return. Fairy flashed a grin, vowed to help, then leaned in and asked, "What's your name?" She strode forward, declared, "I'm Sheila, a diplomat," and the agreement was approved. The Redguard family shielded Cleo as she struck a pose, and Togo's brush captured her every line. Later, when they returned to the lively party, Fade froze as someone across the room leveled a hostile stare straight at him. Rage boiling in his veins, the man roared at the fairies, his voice raw and rough. He snapped his fingers. The red dragon erupted into being as he sneered at the fairy. They scoffed. How could Regard's so-called incapable second son possibly command a legendary creature? The fairy's calm voice shattered his pride. "You didn't win the dragon chose you as a friend." Jealousy contorted his face as he sneered, mocking Faye and insisting she was unworthy and that he would make a far better match for the dragon. Before the fight could erupt, the calmest man in the room, Leo Corley, stepped in and his steel gaze froze the man mid-sentence. He loomed like a storm, posture screaming a warning, leave or face the consequences, and terror slammed into the man, who bolted. Even after the moment faded, turmoil gnawed at Toga, so he spilled his tangled thoughts to Faye. The fairy's calm voice steadied him, revealing the red dragon had singled him out for his boundless kindness and ironclad reliability. He regarded the dragon as a comrade, not a trophy, and they forged a fierce friendship. When fate learned it, relief flooded her. You grin, heart racing, you know just how lucky he is to have him as his best friend. The party had barely ended when a brutal downpour exploded over the capital. Bade, Togo, and the locals staggered back into the tavern, bone-deep exhaustion dragging at every step. Faye slipped out of the party scene, silently swearing off celebrations for a while. They exhausted everyone, but the night finally paid off when Chloe strode in and agreed to pose for him. Once they'd settled, oblivious Leo Corliss blurted, "Did Togo buy a Slavic woman?" And Fade snapped back, making clear Togo had hired a woman for a specific purpose. The locals froze in their tracks when they spotted Togo hunched and feverishly sketching. He couldn't shake the nagging thought that every flicker in his head was swallowed by painting. His blunt words slammed into Togo, crushing his spirit until he whispered an apology. Leo Corliss, seeing he'd sounded harsh, rushed over and eased the sting with a gentle reassurance. He shrugged and said he didn't blame him, odd, but he vanishes into his art. This hits like sunlight after nearly being swallowed by dark thoughts. Curiosity burned as he leaned in and asked Togo if he truly saw the world as that beautiful. Togo nodded, eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window. He jabbed toward the rain-drenched city and said the streetlights were pouring light down, calling it beautiful. His sincerity stunned the locals, who nodded and echoed that it was beautiful. Their quiet moment shattered when a knock thundered at the door. The three froze, jaws dropping, when they spotted Chloe drenched and shivering this late. Chloe's voice dropped to a hush. A stalker was prowling just outside her house. Barred from returning, she had nowhere left to run. They hustled her inside and plunged her into a steaming bath, desperate to drive the cold out of her bones. Steam curled around her as they froze. She had nothing to change into. He offered to sketch something for her, but Leo Corliss coldly shot the idea down. "Listen, if anyone learns of Togo's convenient ability, they'll pounce and everything will collapse." Faye nodded. They trusted Chloe without question, but Chloe's posting inside the royal castle had already unleashed a web of unseen complications. After the discussion, they singled out the hotel's empty room. Faye had never set foot in it. It simply didn't suit him. Leo Corliss pitched giving this to Chloe. While at the reception, he treated choosing lingerie like a covert mission, fingers skimming lace as he hunted the perfect piece. This was an in for nobles, guaranteed they'd have something perfectly suited. Leo Corliss seized control with cool, unshakable calm. Togo and Faye slipped into a silent, instant agreement. When chaos explodes and everyone panics, the man who stays ice cold becomes utterly awe-inspiring. Dawn cracked and Chloe remained trapped inside the borrowed room. Faye dragged her straight into the mall to hunt down some decent clothes. Chloe squirmed at the favor, but they laughed it off and christened it her modeling fee. He slammed his wallet on the table and vowed to buy every last thing she wanted. Chloe practically vibrated as she gushed about a tea sold only in the royal city and invited them to go buy it with her, while he trailed behind, lost in thought as phrases about Chloe's work in the royal castle of Lingard spun through his head. That sent his mind racing through a tangle of possible complications. Once Chloe picked her outfit, they all headed straight for the tea shop. Chloe skidded to a stop at a pawn shop, sparking Togo's curiosity. When he asked what she was staring at, she was fixed on a display of knives, wondering if they might need something like that. The second Faye asked Leo Corliss for his opinion. She saw the truth. This weapon would never fit Chloe's frame. He is the man whose gaze is locked on the sword behind the display glass. Were gnawing at them, Faye and Togo hit his number. Leo Corliss blurted an apology, insisting it had been nothing but a dream. Togo heard him and bristled, unconvinced. He demanded to know if Leo Corliss wanted a sword. Leo shook his head and said no, but the wavering in his eyes gave him away. He threw that in and snapped, "Is this about money, or something buried way deeper?" After a long pause, Leo Corliss finally confessed he could. He clutched his coins like a miser and stared at the sword with shame, sure he didn't deserve it. He stepped forward and offered to pay, vowing he'd sell his jewelry if it meant covering the expenses. Leo's jaw dropped. He snapped, "Why had Togo gone so far?" He smirked and declared, "This sword suits me. Shot, was it yours from the start?" The Ocorellus froze, dropped into stunned silence with eyes blown wide, proof it was true. White as a sheet, he snapped, explain yourself. He let out a long, heavy breath and plunged into his tale. He'd once sworn himself to a lord in the lands of Hora, and the sword at his side had been his master's gift. That same blade in his hand cut down 2 people, one of them an innocent civilian, and the new master who seized his owner's place. Those deeds branded him a criminal scoundrel, and they tore the sword from his grasp, ripping his past away. When the villagers unveiled his tale, Togo's defenses dissolved and he surrendered to their revelation as if destiny itself had spoken. They unearthed a priceless lost relic. He barreled into the pawnshop to buy a sword, but terrified locals surged forward and stopped him. His voice cracked into a tremor as he demanded to know why Togo would sacrifice so much for someone like him. Togo paused, groped for words, confessed he barely understood slavery, but seeing others happy set his heart ablaze. He'd been seared by the brutal ache of losing something priceless, and the pulse-bounding thrill of seeing it brought back to life. Sincerity burned from him, yet the locals stood stunned. His body trembled and murmurs spread that he wasn't worthy to wield the sword. The fairy lunged forward, voice like thunder, and demanded the seller hand the sword back. The old man's gaze snapped to the strange mirror blade, one of a kind and shockingly expensive. Nothing could stop him, he steeled himself to pay. They hustle locals into saying yes now and promise to tackle the complaints afterward. He planted his feet like iron and refused to yield. Moments later, he burst out of the store, lugging the sword like it was a boulder. Leo Corliss fixed his gaze on the blade, emotions raging inside him. He couldn't understand why he'd done this for some slacker. He choked out that he's terrified he'll kill someone again because of this. He steadied him with an iron calm voice, promising there was nothing to fear and that the local wasn't one of those people. They watched him tiptoe through the forest, sparing every blossom while the horses leaned into him with calm, unquestioning trust. Leo Corliss attacked his training like a storm, pushing harder with every burning rep. It slams into him, a single reckless step could unleash disaster. He staked his claim on the blade and scorned the locals' past like it didn't exist. He rips open his secrets and the locals' regret crashes over him. Blazing urge to use it again. Bay added that the lay Oculus stands cornered now. No choice remains, the sword's already been bought. The anointed locals the guardian of Togo. They steeled themselves for a storm of challenges they couldn't weather alone. Leo Corliss, shackled by his past, clung to the echo of him praising his hands and the trust carved into his face. He swallowed the truth, branded a criminal and trapped as a slave, but those same chains handed him a shot at redemption. Steeled, the locals dropped to their knees before him, seized the sword with knife-like grace, and rose to defend him as a second lord and loyal friend. Things barreled back from the tea shop, clattering into the moment and yanking open the curtain on a brand new chapter. A few days later, deep in the forest, Togo flung paint onto his canvas as locals posed with a sword and muttered that he was unusual. Make your drawing, reach out and ask how the sword felt. Leocorlus wrestled with it, every move screaming that he still had no idea how to use it. He shouldered the guardian's burden like iron, never once abandoning his charge. Reality slammed into Togo. It was time to head to Amelia, where the whole place lay shut, every door barred and every window dark. He beamed at them and beckoned them inside. Chloe sank into a peaceful rest as the familiar spot wrapped her in its quiet, irresistible enchantment every single time. Guilt gnawed at him every time he went back to visit the locals. Chloe soothed him, treasuring their company. Its warmth lifted her spirits. Chloe brewed tea, struck a portrait pose, and Togo dipped his brush, tracing her radiant smile onto the canvas. Curiosity blazing, Chloe asked Togo if drawing every single day ever wore him down. Haz gaped, bewilderment sparking across his features, as if exhaustion were a foreign word. Locals swore Togo worshipped art, splashing color onto people with boundless joy every single day. Chloe witnessed the bond between him and his craft ignite into something raw, electric, and impossible to ignore. The conversation flipped the moment she dropped Togo's dream of becoming a full-time artist. He jerked back, his face snapping into shadow. He'd never voiced that ambition. It was nothing but a suggestion. Doubt ripped through him that his art could sustain him, while memories and trauma clawed at his mind. Sensing his anxiety, Chloe swept him into a calming hug, her arms soft and steady. Chloe's teasing giggle cut through the air, and Togo's cheeks exploded into a deep, burning blush. She leaned in and asked if he felt better. He blinked in surprise. He really did, her hugs a soothing balm. Chloe grinned and said, "It's amazing to have what you love." His eyes locked on Togo as he painted with fiery enthusiasm. Curiosity blazing, Togo leaned in and asked, "Do you have any hobbies?" Lopez then confessed she loves shopping, but she wouldn't call it a hobby. Remember how she brewed tea with the calm ferocity of a master, each cup a precise, perfect ritual. She topped off his cup with steaming tea, and its warmth raced through his veins. Next morning, Togo's eyes snapped to Chloe. He was already plotting his move to go. The fairy sent the firebird's spirit. It swooped in and delivered a letter whose script no eye could decipher. He thrust the letter into the locals' hands. They skimmed it and declared it sharp and concise. Chloe darted into their midst, hunting shelter. Both of them are barreling in. Any second they'll be here. Urgency crackling, they barreled into the Regard estate, where fairies bowed in solemn ritual and swept them into the room. They, hearts pounding with electric excitement, lunged forward and sprinted into his arms, relief washing over them at the sight of him. She leaned in and gently asked what had happened. They poured out the story, explaining that the obsessive stalker dogged her every step until that morning finally ended. Carrasco flung the door open. There he stood. He barreled into the mansion, certain Togo lived there too. The fairy urges them to whisk the fabric to Rigvard's estate, the only place it'll be safe. Togo urged her to hole up in his hidden cabin deep in the forest. Grinning Clown whipped out a jaw-dropping surprise. They all jumped on the plan. Togo's house was buried from sight and damn near impossible to find. Oculus gave a tight nod, but his wary eyes betrayed his doubt. They decided in a heartbeat. Togo and Clow landed on Togo's doorstep. Chloe's jaw dropped when he stumbled upon a magical wooden house tucked deep in the forest, ringed by Pegasi and unicorns, an utterly enchanting sight. Chloe's jaw dropped at the unexpected beauty, and while she was distracted, the horses sauntered over and let her pet them, flipping stunned surprise into pure joy. Violet leaned in and whispered, "Stay close, protect the flow," her voice a fierce plea for him to be careful. He agreed, then sprinted to ready the guest room for her. Soon thunderous bangs and frantic scratches erupted from the house, terrifying the locals and even the clothing. He reappeared, beckoned Chloe into the guest room, and whipped it into shape in a heartbeat. Plastered with living sketches and electric scribbles, like they'd been summoned in a single heartbeat. Chloe's grin exploded as she spun through her brand new room, joy sparking through her like fireworks. Alarm flared among the locals as Togo blitzed through the preparations at a shockingly rapid pace. Threat neutralized, Chloe exhaled, peeled off her jacket, and rallied everyone back to the drawing boards. Brimming with boundless enthusiasm, he said yes, and their days together burst into life. Brimming with art and laughter, a hawk-eyed vigilance spots danger the instant it appears. A few days later, Chloe vaulted into the saddle of a horse that had somehow won Pegasus's trust during their journey through the forest. The sky hung clear and blue as flowers burst into bloom in every direction. The horse surged forward, as if dragging them straight into the perfect place. They slipped into a hushed glade, and Togo flashed a grin, urging Chloe to dive into some forest mischief. Confused, Chloe snapped, "What do you mean by saying it's like a forest?" He confessed painting her in the forest had been a battle. The woods were gorgeous, but a wrongness lingered in the air. It slammed into him, clawed stuck out in the forest like a neon flare, utterly out of place. Her years at the royal palace forged her into the perfect presence for gleaming castles and glittering grand balls. Togo swore that if she fused deeper into the forest, he'd forge her essence into something the wild would claim. Right then he jabbed his finger at a butterfly with wings like spilled ink, unadorned, yet utterly mesmerizing. He thrust a brilliant flower into her palm and declared its color the very shade of a local's eyes. The second he had to name the color hiding behind closed lids, he froze. Their eyes darted around, a finger shot skyward, and when they tilted their heads up, soft sunlight streamed through the lush green leaves. Grinning, Togo declared it the very color of her eyes. He confessed Chloe was breathtaking in every way, but it was her eyes that stole his breath. Chloe froze, words ripped from her throat as heat bloomed across her cheeks while she stared at the dazzling light. No one had ever admired her eyes like that. His words fell flat, so he hollered for her to look at the blazing red fruit dangling from the nearby tree. He declared this was the very first red he'd ever splashed into his forest sketches. He stared at the fruit, curiosity gnawing at him. Was this even safe to eat? He swallowed hard and admitted he couldn't be sure if it was poisonous. Lot chuckled low and amused and assured him it wasn't poisonous, just painfully tasteless. Sharp memory ripped through her, the exact way she'd tried it as a kid. Trusting her, Togo sank his teeth into the fruit and instantly recoiled, a sharp grimace ripping across his face. The clown snickered, warned him to brace for the taste, then burst into laughter at his reaction. He forced a grin through the awful taste, brushed it off, and insisted that even lousy food can nourish the heart. Chloe cocked her head, baffled. Togo remembered his teacher hammering into him that even things that seem useless actually fuel the soul. That simple wisdom landed on Chloe like a spark, and she watched him with quiet admiration as he slipped the red fruit into his bag and strode home. Get this, they didn't eat it, they smashed it into paint, and no one knows why, since it already showed off so many shades of red. Togo hoarded tiny, overlooked things like treasure and offhandedly dubbed them food for the heart. Leo Corellis watched his paint collection swell and shrugged that it was merely accumulating, while Togo grinned and said even the unnecessary can become necessary. They bolted, abandoning their clothes as embarrassment set their cheeks ablaze. He warned that some losses we can survive and others will shatter everything. You stare at a breathtaking sky, insisting that mulling over a strange fruit's taste or wandering forever still matters. Those unnecessary little things fed his soul and set his heart roaring back to life. You can sketch a feast until your hands ache and it still won't fill your belly, but it pours life into your heart. Deny that and the heart will wither. His words split the clay like a hidden window she'd sworn shut. His beautiful gaze revealed the wonderful young man beneath. Forged by a wise teacher. Envy flared in Chloe and regret gnawed at him for never learning those lessons as they sped toward the sprawling field of flowers. Togo's cheer burst into the air, lifting everyone's spirits. Chloe noticed his presence slowly changing her. Eyes that had once been full of sorrow now glinted with quiet hope, and they spent the day weaving flower crowns, a simple craft that unexpectedly lifted the weight from her heart. Night after night they gathered for dinner, swapping stories and erupting into honest, room-warming laughter. That morning the great bird swooped down to the well and kept them company as they scrubbed clothes, and later Togo slipped into the forest to paint, every brushstroke sharpening his focus to a razor edge. One day they burst in, cradling a gift and wearing garments that shimmered with the same fierce radiance as Khlo herself. He splashed her joyful smile onto the canvas in a heartbeat, yet the deeper feelings swimming in her eyes left him baffled. That night Toga dove headfirst into his creativity, losing himself in a whirlwind of ideas. He closed the distance to take a closer look, and his fierce, blazing passion ignited a crimson flush across her cheeks. She steeled herself, slid in with a devilish grin, and unleashed a bold proposal. I'll stick to the general highlights to keep the channel safe. For the full details, read the manga. Once Chloe went bowling and, flashing a mischievous grin, goaded Togo into sketching her. They tore into that drawing until the night swallowed the hours. Don't start inventing stories. He steadied himself, forged the setback into a lesson, and plunged back into his sketch. The next day he will clutch his sketchbook like a lifeline. He snapped awake and found clothes still strewn across his bed. He couldn't fathom why she was in his room. Riffling through the sketchbook, he kept willing courage into his chest and urging himself to be braver. Page by page I ripped through, unearthing its hidden images. Togo froze as confusion slammed into him. He couldn't decide what to believe. He tucked a blanket over the clothes and slipped into the night to clear his head. Leo Kills locked eyes with him, a knowing stare that spoke volumes. Word spread, locals had seen clothes hurled into Togo's room the night before. Heat lurked outside the window nonstop, a maddening nuisance. He tried to explain that, but the words died on his tongue. The locals, chillingly calm, bore him no grudge. Dread slammed into him, the clothes still hadn't budged. She almost never greets the dawn, waking early is utterly unlike her. They barreled in, breathless with worry, and discovered she still hadn't arrived. They'd already cradled her into a hammock, but by afternoon she still lay motionless, stubbornly unconscious. A lightning-fast scan revealed the magic was bleeding out. Lee felt it too. Pegasi are pouring their magic into her to keep her steady, and why they're doing it is a total mystery. They shoved the question about the magic Chloe used at him, heart hammering, and he finally confessed, I'm Leo Corliss. Last night he dove into painting her so fiercely the rest of the world blurred away. He remembered nothing but painting, non-stop. He endured the slow crush of days and the fever's searing pulse, then snapped awake. Faye Ibra leaned in, voice low and urgent. Togo, have you ever felt this way standing next to someone? He froze, shook his head, and said no. Then Faye slammed him with shocking news. Suspicion flared. Togo might be enchanted. An ancient spell that summons love. The moment he heard that legend, the fog in his mind shattered and every piece snapped into place. He recalled the clay strangely mesmerizing him the instant they first met at the royal castle's party. Beatty bristled. Dave. Togo, suddenly smitten, set every alarm in her head blazing. She revealed the magic ignites the moment you lock eyes, and Togo admitted he'd always stared people dead in the eye. The truth detonated between them. Chloe bewitched him. The spell ate away at his heart, twisting him petty and treacherous from the very first moment. Clothing whipped aside and someone jerked awake in the hammock, bound tight and reeling with confusion. He locked eyes with Togo and snapped, "What happened?" They cut her off, accusing her of bewitching Togo to slam into the runner. Panic flared across her face as the locals swarmed her, hurling blunt questions about her intentions. He blinked, bewilderment crackling in his voice as he blurted, "Is Chloe in a hurry?" Finally, she snatched up a nude sketch and thrust it forward, breathless. She hurled a spell at him, pouring every last spark of her magic into it and draining herself dry. It erupted in sync with yesterday's events, unfolding right alongside Clow. Cornered, she ripped off her mask and spat the truth. She wasn't who they believed. She was a spy, on a mission to unearth the Red Dragon's secrets, initially targeting the Thables and the Red Guard. She hatched a razor-simple plan: glide into the royal castle's party, charm him with a disarming smile, and squeeze every scrap of information from him. Everything shattered the instant Togo, blissfully unaware, locked eyes with her. She fumbled and accidentally unleashed a charm spell, and in a heartbeat her world shattered, the castle job a sham, the creepy stalker just another lie. She lingered until the final heartbeat, every second a thread in her disguise. Chloe planned to hole up at the Regard estate and finish her mission, but a cruel twist tossed her straight into the heart of the forest. Her mission lay in ruins, and she staggered at how unusually resistant Togo was to her magic. The spell was supposed to work perfectly, but instead Togo sat frozen, feverishly sketching page after page. He smirked, sure she just spotted easy prey. She was dead wrong, and face snapped, irritation crackling as she demanded, "Who sent you?" Chloe, ever the cunning spy, snapped her mouth shut and refused to give up her employer's name. In a heartbeat, she slipped free from the ropes that bound her, leaving everyone frozen in stunned silence. Leo killed the last one so fast no one could react. Chloe barreled toward him like she was attacking, then instead pressed a gentle hand to his head and whispered an apology, regret lacing her words and a bittersweet smile on her lips. As they parted, she bit her lip and called out, "We had a blast together." He seized her hand, voice cracking as he begged her to stay just a little longer. He still burned to paint her, but Chloe flatly refused and declared staying impossible for both of them. She trembled as she warned that if she stayed her defenses could crack, letting the spy's survival-hardened heart begin to feel again. He demanded she stop spying and go live in the forest. Chloe tore herself away because the paycheck was too fat to quit, and even with the forest tugging at her heart, she admitted she wanted the money too. Opulence wrapped her in honeyed chains, every indulgence seeping poison into her heart. If she stays, she'll wage a relentless campaign for peace and fortune, and might even fuse them into one. That's why she bolted. She felt the words of him who decides how human hearts should live slam into her mind. Years ago, starvation devoured everyone she loved. Despair clutched her, and he implored her to accept both desires. He blurted a daring plan: she could live in the forest and still rake in money. He zeroed in on her, convinced she'd be his exclusive model. Chloe froze, ripped between her superior's command to bury her true feelings and the sudden warmth igniting in her chest from his words. After years of numbness, life surged through her as she weighed Togo's proposal. A warm, gentle smile betrayed everything. It hit her, and she ran with it, romping joyfully with the horses while the rest of the house frets over whether she'll cope after trading espionage for a modeling career in Togo. Coral's voice sliced the air, skepticism blazing as he warned Togo not to make hasty decisions. Escaping the underground world was a brutal gauntlet that demanded iron resolve, but when the forest's spark kissed the clay, the buried heart slammed back to life. Maybe the path back has vanished for good. Guilt and gratitude tore through Togo, and beneath it all he ached for her to stay. The next day, that's razor-sharp voice tore through the air and ordered Clug to stop, not because she dared. She demanded he put on the dress she'd chosen. They descended on the city to hunt for clothes, and Togo picked up the entire tab. For the first time, Chloe froze mid-reach, refusing to spend someone else's money. The sudden shock of it slammed into her. A tiny sharp pang of sadness stabbed him. Her closed gimble smile melted his tension and proclaimed she was already satisfied. She wasn't chasing a full belly, she ached for a heart bursting with warmth and belonging. He felt her pluck his thoughts from the air. Leah flashed a sly smile and taunted that any skilled spy would have noticed. He declared Togo's face read like an open book, and Togo froze as surprise flashed across his features. People always told him his expressions were unreadable, a locked vault no one could crack. Leo's eyebrow shot up and he snapped, "Who told you that?" A bittersweet shadow stole over Hogo's face and his smile died. He whispered that it was his parents, and Leo froze, every muscle coiled, yet he swallowed his reply. Unnoticed amid the crackling tension, shadowy figures in the crowd zero in on them, eyes locked on the target. The order hit like thunder: bring him back at any cost, tear him from their clutches and use force if necessary. Who their target was still a mystery, but the answers were right around the corner. The shopping flew by, clothes hummed thoughtfully, insisting it took hardly any time. She scanned the stalls and realized there was almost nothing left to buy. Reality slapped that notion. Lee staggered under a mountain of bags, stared at the towering pile and joked, "So this is your idea of not so much," while she stood stunned, mouth agape as it hit her how much she'd bought. She froze, offered to shoulder the bags, and the locals brushed her off with cheerful waves, insisting she go enjoy herself. They swore Togo would be over the moon about this too. She froze, chest nodding, unsure she could accept such kindness. Her face softened and a quiet, guilty thought slipped in. After her past actions, she didn't deserve this kindness. He planted his feet and snapped, "This is my decision." Guilt clung to her since yesterday, the instant she bragged that hiring her would cost a fortune. Innocent bolted inside and reappeared lugging a monstrous sack of gold, so unreal she could barely grasp it. He grabbed her hands and vowed money meant nothing next to the chance to pour the truth of her soul into her art. He was ready to pay any price for that. He swore that if she agreed to pose for him, he'd spare no expense. He'd build her a house and she'd saddle up horses to thunder into the city whenever she wanted. The forest still hid countless secret spots begging to be explored, and when warmer days arrive, he'll lead her down to the picture-perfect riverbank. He ached to splatter canvases with never-ending adventures, watch seasons flicker across them, and trap every shared moment in color. Just as he teetered on the brink of losing himself, Faye slid in and steadied him with a gentle, unwavering hand. She felt the fire roaring in him, but declared the situation complicated and closed. Luz's warm smile settled as he paused and asked for a moment to weigh the decision. She lingered in the fog of yesterday's thoughts until his voice slammed into her and dragged her back into the present. They pressed on with their shopping and barreled into a shop for injured women. The clown sauntered in like he owned the place, leaving Togo and Leo frozen and awkward on the doorstep. Crimson flooded Hugo's face as he froze in front of the store, mortified and pinned beneath the merciless midday sun. Not wanting trouble, the locals pounced, frisked him from collar to cuff, and declared every trace of magic gone. They couldn't let their guard down. Anything could erupt from the shadows at any second. Out of nowhere, a horse-drawn carriage slammed to a halt right in front of them. Inside, the truth snapped into place. The man was confronting Togo. Leo barked, "What do you want?" and the man shrank back beneath his commanding glare. He froze, fingers trembling as he slid the letter forward, no sender named, just one blunt command. He was to serve as the lone mage of that house. The man thrust a chest of gold into view, pure bait to pull him right in. The offer sparkled, but Togo barely glanced at it and dismissed it. His disinterest left the man frozen, jaw slack with shock. Distrust melted into a calculating smirk on his face. Leo, trusting nothing in that stare, snapped, "Leave." Looks like the man sighed, just threw in the towel. He refused to retreat. He switched tactics, and shadow tentacles ripped through the soil. Rope cinched Togo and Leo together in merciless knots. Leo thrashed, but the dark chains clamped around him and held him fast. In a heartbeat, shadowy tentacles lunged and hurled Togo into a carriage where grim figures waited, whisking him away before the locals could escape. The cart's wheels screamed as it shot forward and tore off. He vanished in a heartbeat. The locals failed to protect him a second time. Fury detonated inside him. Rage detonated in his chest as he ripped the dark chains to pieces, but it was already too late. The damage had been done. Trapped in the racing carriage, he thrashed and clawed to break free, and a savage strike to the stomach folded him over, ripping the air from his lungs. He doubled over in agony, gasping, when a captive fixed the attacker with a fierce glare, warning him against excessive cruelty and demanding that he be treated with respect. No one even had a moment to react before the stroller lurched violently, teetered on the brink of toppling, and everyone stumbled. The carriage cover tore open with a deafening rip as a sword's silver gleam sliced clean through the canvas. When Leo Corliss stormed into view, his eyes burned with iron resolve, and he ripped his way inside. He refused to negotiate. He charged in to save his master, but the rescue erupted into chaos. Outnumbered, Leo Corliss was set upon by 3 men before he reached him and slammed backward. Their leader shoved the limp coachman aside, snatched the reins, and spurred the horses into a roaring gallop. Leo split his focus, shielding Togo and parrying attackers, when a blade suddenly whipped toward his back. He spun on a razor's edge, slammed a diagonal parry into the attacker's sword, and sent him sprawling, 1 down, 4 left. They swarmed him, tightening a circle as they surged closer. Leo seized the fight's tempo, locked eyes with the two opponents and baited them into attacking first. When they lunged, he countered in a lightning-fast blur. One thunderous sweep slammed them both to the ground. Only two still stood. The final pair leapt together as one. Leo clung for dear life, parrying each furious blow with cold, practiced precision. He crunched the numbers in a heartbeat and felled another foe. Sure it was the last. A shadow flickered at the edge of his vision. It was already too late. The hidden attacker bided his time. Leo barely had a moment to lift his left hand to deflect the strike as a searing pain lanced through his arm and the blade bit deep, blood streaming down, not fatal but serious. Shadowy reinforcements poured in, his wounds drained the strength from his grip, and the odds crumbled in seconds. The situation snapped into a crisis. Togo plunged into grave peril. A carriage hurtled away from the city center. He screamed for the driver to stop, desperation shredding his voice, but the driver didn't respond. When the man's hand drifted toward his mouth, he snapped his teeth shut and sank them into it. A savage strike ripped into his stomach, agony searing through him, but he pressed on. Bound at the wrists, he tore at his restraints and lunged for the wheel to wrest control from the driver, but every desperate attempt failed as they pounded him harder until he could barely move. Everything changed in a heartbeat as a dark figure leapt onto the carriage. Chloe slammed down, her boot rocketing into the man's face with bone-jarring force. He shoved him back and froze, surprise crashing into him. Chloe darted to the carriage, peered inside, and her eyes went wide at the sight of Togo being beaten. Her hands snatched the reins and she yanked with everything she had, wrenching the runaway carriage into a screeching halt as the threat ebbed and she lunged to check on him. His face flared red, exhaustion didn't explain all of it. She recalled that she'd bolted out in the middle of shopping, still wearing that scandalously revealing outfit from the laundry store. He snapped his gaze away, cheeks burning with awkwardness. Before the situation could settle, the locals surged in. Wounds scored Leo's body, his chest heaved in ragged, desperate gasps. Alarmed Togo's attention snapped to him for a heartbeat, ignoring his injuries, while Chloe demanded to know how many he'd knocked down. Leo Corliss let out a razor exhale and sensed 9 attackers crouched in ambush. It screamed his lethal skill, but the ambush didn't add up. Chloe couldn't place a single attacker, so the hand that pulled the strings stayed hidden. Her mind snarled as she clawed at the facts, desperate to piece them together while the clock chewed up the seconds. Before she could form a thought, a voice cut through. Faye, who'd gone to look for the group after they didn't show at the meeting spot, had stumbled right into this chaos. The clowns vaulted into motion, sprinting for Regard's residence to fetch urgent medical help. They were about to leave when a cold, nagging certainty grabbed her. The attacker's brutal, familiar methods screamed recognition, and she knew it without a shadow of a doubt. Looming behind it all, the Jordan family pulled every string. At the Regard estate, it hit like a blow. Leo Corliss's injury was far worse than expected. A deep gash in his arm kept gushing blood. Klaus slammed his hand up to shield himself, an old reflex from his shield days kicking in. Leo Corla felt no remorse. He wore the wound like a badge for saving Mr. Togo, and Mr. Togo refused to let him pretend it was nothing. Burning with resolve to cure Leo Corliss, he implored Chloe to take command of the room. He roared he'd healed others before and refused to let him suffer. He snatched the brush, his hands blurred, carving bold strokes across the canvas to paint Leo Corliss whole and unscarred. Togo's brush froze Leo Corliss on the canvas exactly as he'd imagined, whole and unharmed. Togo hoisted the brush, unleashing a roaring surge of energy that ripped through the room. A surge poured from the canvas into Leo Corliss, and in a heartbeat the grievous wound on his arm sealed shut. Guilt twisted Leo's features, shame seared him for putting them in danger. He could only force out praise for Leo's effort, his own words choking back into silence. He swallowed the argument burning on his tongue and thanked her, when Faye brought Chloe back inside. Her jaw dropped at Leo Corliss' full recovery, but Claude's curiosity only flickered. He waved off her questions and locked onto the attackers from before. She swallowed hard, voice cracking, and blurted out that she didn't know who ordered the attack. Someone had Togo squarely in their sights. Lau also said Faye pressed the doctor about Togo's abilities. She blurted it out. She'd been undercover there, posing as the doctor's assistant. Faye and Togo stopped dead, disbelief ripping through them as simple makeup had masked her identity. Worst of all, they suspected the doctor had been bought and might be quietly spilling the details of Togo's visit. The doctor spilling information meant a powerful figure had Togo in their crosshairs. All signs screamed his ties to the Rigvard family and hinted at a dangerous link to the Red Dragon. He spat the truth through gritted teeth. He'd even thought about leaving, convinced the forest would shield him from any more trouble. His words hit like a thrown stone, her face inches away clouded over and doubt flashed in her eyes. After a heartbeat, she slammed down her choice. She'll work for Togo. Relief surged through her the instant she made that choice. Chloe finally came clean. She couldn't keep being a spy forever. Her charms fed on youth and beauty. The moment they wilt, her worth on the field evaporates. She didn't expect to live long. She was primed for change. The news felt sweet, but Chloe ripped through the calm with urgent information. The nobles bankrolling the Poachers were the very people who'd employed her, scions of an influential noble house. They stormed ordinary lands, stripping them bare to harvest rare trophies, unicorn and Pegasus feathers. The news slammed into Faye. She immediately told Oculus about the forest poachers, the revelation landing like a gut punch that left her reeling. Klaus snarled that Jaguar and the family unleashed shameless, in-your-face tactics. They zeroed in on the Red Dragon. Then she announced 3 explosive truths the sprawling family had uncovered. A boy crackling with extraordinary magic was sheltered deep in a forest teeming with guardian Pegasi and watchful unicorns. Slavthog bought a battle-scarred knight who had once sworn his sword to the Lord of Gold. He'd also slain Lord Holder, and the locals wasted no time blaming him. Klaus zeroed in, peeled back every lie, and finally exposed his true name, Bale Clyde Orient. She tore through his past, unearthed the sword he'd long abandoned, staged a pawnshop check, and his instant, guilty reaction sealed her suspicions. He dazzled Faye and Togo with razor-sharp spycraft while the locals murmured, baffled that Chloe had even dug into him. She snarled that to snatch the boy, shielded by forest nobles and a ferocious guard, they'd have to take hostages. The Yoran family hunted for relatives of him, found none, and couldn't turn kin into a weapon against him. The Joran family zeroed in on Togo's inner circle, his guards. Chloe dropped the name Interior Bells, and Leo Corliss froze, his face screaming just how much that name mattered to him. That night Togo slipped back into the forest, thoughts storming so hard he couldn't even paint, and as he was about to drift to sleep a sharp knock on the door ripped him out of his reverie. Exhaustion clawed at him, but Leo Corliss staggered in. After a long pause, Togo finally spoke, his thoughts snapping to clothing earlier than usual. A low voice sliced the silence and spoke the words, the inner bells. She burned with the conviction that she was important to Leo Corliss. Leo Corliss swore that Interior was his knight companion, both serving the same lord. Dread hammered her chest. What if she was nothing but the Joran family's hostage? Cold dread clawed at their gut, imagining Leo Corliss ripped away. Leo Corliss roared that he'd engineer his own escape. Inside, like the night itself, threatened to mirror that fierce, iron determination. Leo Corliss thundered that protecting one's master came above all else. Irritation flaring, Togo bolted off to demand answers from Chloe or to hunt down the exact spot where she'd been eavesdropping. He implored her for a plan to get the hostages out alive. At first, Chloe snapped the question, "Did you summon the Red Dragon?" And Togo, not denying it, simply confessed. The revelation hit Leo Corliss like a bolt. He'd never heard it before, while Chloe's mind snapped into action, forging a plan. She threw out the plan to strike a binding contract with the Yoran family. He dismissed a head-on attack. The hostages were almost certainly shackled by a magical contract, the same trap from Leo Corliss' Slav metal band. Knowing they can be restored in a heartbeat. If Togo calls forth another Red Dragon, the Yoran family's most coveted trophy, the clan might free the hostages in return. Chloe called it the least risky move. Leo Corliss erupted, refusing to accept it without ironclad security guarantees for Togo. Chloe leaned in, voice steady as iron. The worst thing isn't death, it's that being imprisoned. Her spycraft could rip the magical contract to shreds, clearing the path to rescue Togo and the other hostages. Disappointment slammed into Leo Corliss. But Togo's will to continue to the test and expose whether they truly trust their clothing. Ever trusting, he fired a blunt question at Chloe, "Can I rely on you?" And Chloe, frozen with surprise, confessed that trusting her could be the worst move you ever make. Her heart had already sworn to team up with him, not a single shred of evidence to back it. Shock hit him. He made no demands. Her ironclad determination was payment enough, and he trusted her without a shred of doubt. Plan's backing bulldozed the locals into agreement. Chloe burned to show her skills and vowed she'd stop at nothing. After a charged pause, Leo snapped one brutal demand. As Togo's bodyguard, he needed a shield. He swore he'd never be caught off guard like that day. If he failed to shield his master, his role would be thrown into doubt, yet he insisted on accompanying him into Jordan's territory at any cost. Moved by Leo's devotion, Togo raced to paint a shield before he could get far. Leo recklessly snatched it up. They lowered him onto the bed. Night had fallen and exhaustion hammered his bones. He needed to rest. At the Jordan estate, Lord Daning's fingers closed around a spy's letter. The letter warned that titanic magic blocked the enchantment from ever taking hold. His attention snapped to the Jordan family, and he stepped forward, ready to strike a deal. A grin split his face. The news was unmistakably encouraging. He barked at the valet to fire off a reply. They were heading straight into Rigor's territory. He stormed off with a handful of guards at his side. He swept one into his entourage, crowning them a prized asset. The next day in the city of Togo, the local Fae and Clue nailed down a rendezvous with Jordan. Tension crackled in the air, and Fae trembled the most, like she might snap any second. Soon the ruler of Jordan strode in, launching their plan, and a surprise meeting erupted. At the first meeting, Leo Corliss locked eyes with an old friend standing among Jordan's group. Lord Jordan surprised us with a disarming grin, my first face-to-face with him, and he wasn't alone. My gaze snapped to a familiar presence lurking against the ceiling, and its chill crawled straight into my bones. One of them was the very thug who tormented him at the party. Santa's radio Jordan, the Jordan family's eldest son, lived beneath a father wilder than a hurricane. Lord Jordan snapped into action and dove straight into the work. He pushed to anoint Togo as the Grand family's sole magician. That had to be rejected outright. Even as the deal glinted like a crown, he refused to bind himself to exclusivity. Here their strategy ignited, and instead of a flat-out refusal, Togo tossed out a one-time contract. Silence slammed into the room, and at first Santos kept his cool. His mask ripped away, his true nature blazing through. The moment Togo summoned the red dragon, his interest snapped into a hungry focus. Smooth sailing shattered the instant Santos, burning to push things forward, slid the contract across the table. Their opening demand, the red dragon had to summon him, and they'd shower him with lavish rewards in return. He froze mid-step, doubt flaring. Does it really have to be a red dragon? He whispered. This was the linchpin of the plan. The day before, Chloe drilled into Togo that he couldn't hesitate at the negotiating table. She knew they'd push for an exclusive agreement. If Togo forces a one-time contract, they'll demand nothing less than the red dragon be called forth. Right on cue, they got exactly what they asked for. Pouncing on the opening, Togo tossed out a bolder plan: skip the red dragon, summon a different creature just as rare and valuable. A single burning question tore through the silence: what kind of creature was it? He declared he'd decide only after he'd had time to think. Santos wavered, uncertainty gnawing at him over the deal. Riaido never hesitated. The red dragon-like mythical beast enthralled him just as fiercely. He burned to see it. With the decision still hanging, they clamored for the red dragon, and when that demand was granted, the deal was sealed. The Jordans gaped as the red dragon, or a creature shockingly like it, towered before them. With the reward on the table, Santos, burning to finish this, leaned in and demanded, "Tell me, Ashtag, how much do you want?" He declared, his voice like ice, that he didn't need money. They slammed down two conditions. Jairon had to bury every secret about himself and vow never to meddle in his affairs again. He jabbed a finger at the interior and blurted out an unexpected demand. Blindsided her. Her gaze snapped to the Leocorless Oculus, hungry for an explanation. Confusion ripped through her. She couldn't grasp what it meant or why, and unbelievably, Ed Togo was here. Santa plotted a visit to one of the Slavs. They pushed for a replacement, but Togo demanded it be handled internally. Dissatisfied and out of options, Santos swallowed his protest, agreed, and slammed his signature on the contract. And just as rescue came within reach, a nasty new problem reared its head. Interior resisted deep inside. She refused to go. Devotion to Lady Cornelia burned in her. Leo Corliss spotted the hesitation in her eyes, but the deal was sealed. Togo will plunge headfirst into a temporary job with the Grand family. Santos barked for him to return the day after the meeting. At the Regard estate, Faye's breath hitched. Togo had dared step into Jordan's territory. The man closest to him leaned in and swore Leo Corliss Killy would be there too. Idleness never suited her, so she launched herself into action. Meanwhile, Togo and Leo Corliss pulled up to the Jairon family's sprawling estate. The building loomed huge and imposing, but Togo reimagined it as a giant chocolate cake and marveled at its facade. Santos flashed a quick greeting and hustled them into the call room, where everyone inside was ordered to join. She snarled, insisting her duty was to guard Lady Cornelia. Lord Jurin snapped an order, and no one dared defy it. The group stormed through the mansion's opulent corridors and burst into the call room. A tower-shaped room soared with a high ceiling over a wide, round floor and a spiral staircase twisted down to a space with a dining table, a bed, and exactly enough room to summon everything they were meant to evoke. Santos barked his final orders and declared the maid would summon them when the food was ready. Slammed a menacing dawn down on him. Try to break out and the person trapped inside will be killed. Santos shot up the stairs. She shot a backward glance, sorrow pooling in her eyes while Leo Corliss froze, helpless, balling his hands into furious fists. Togo and Leo Corliss coolly pitched a tent right inside the room and dove headfirst into painting. Leo Corliss fell silent, jaw tight, his mind racing as he mapped every corner of the interior. A cheerful little girl burst into the room, her grin exploding the moment she spotted the new faces. She burst out, voice crackling with excitement, "Are you guests?" and Togo confirmed it. She exploded into a joyful leap, laughter crackling out, then let the excitement ebb into a soft, steady calm. She leaned in, eyes alight with curiosity, and shot the question, was Togo a summon of Lord Santos? Confusion roiled in him. When he insisted he wasn't puzzled, her anxiety spiked. He had the nerve to try bargaining with a fairy like that. After the explanation, the twist hit. He'd been the caller all along, not the one being called. Her cheeks burned scarlet, mortified by the mistake, and she squeezed out an apology. He shot her a steady, reassuring grin and said, "Everything's fine." She stepped forward and declared, "I am Cornelia Duran." Cornelia still served inside, and Santos Serrano's younger sister appeared there too, though they looked different. Half-blooded they were, yet Cornelia, noble blood pulsing through her veins. At 8, he crackled with innocent energy, aching to talk to anyone who'd listen. She grinned, firing off story after story at Togo as laughter bubbled from her. Leo Corliss leveled an ice-cold question at her. Was she even allowed to be there? She shrugged and snapped that neither her father nor her brother cared where she was. She was riding a wave of fun, then ripped herself away, warning that the atmosphere inside might be disturbing. Before she left, she murmured that she wanted to come back. Togo's warm yes made her beam, and she grinned, vowing to reveal her treasure next time. Her bubbly grin was a mask, turmoil churned just beneath the surface. Later, Leo Corliss coolly dropped the explosive claim that Cornelia was likely born out of wedlock. Her relatives shrugged her off, eyeing her like a pawn to be married into a ruthless political alliance. Minutes later, her worst fear hit. She accidentally collided with Santos Serrano in the hallway. Without breaking stride, he slammed his fist into her face and walked away, utterly unmoved. The majestic family and their staff paraded her like a trophy. Only the interior watched over her with genuine care, and Togo never had to say a word. Leo's face wore the scars of recent quarrels, and right now they were powerless to help her. Their problems shoved his thoughts aside. Leo snapped toward that, convinced he was really going to paint something other than a red dragon. His face snapped into an unusually stern mask. He wasn't joking. He flat-out refused to craft a red dragon for that respectable family, and that dragon was left alone. Leo nodded with respect, but intrigue crackled through him. What would Togo paint instead? Even Togo himself hesitated. In the grand Santos dining room, his wife and son leaned in, voices low and urgent as they tore the contract apart line by line. They swore it couldn't fail and were convinced there was no escape. Santos dropped the bomb. His mother won't show up for the upcoming summons ceremony. He hit the road and they flat-out ignored it. They all wore satisfied smiles, but Santos practically vibrated with impatience, unable to sit still. Maybe a blood-red dragon or some other colossal beast. He burned with impatience, counting the seconds until the creature descended on the grand family. Inside the great courtyard, life drowned in relentless misery. Santos branded her a whore at every turn, and whenever he disliked her, he cranked the metal collar tighter around her neck. Even after he bought her, he coldly declared she'd never taste freedom. Her soul's purpose was to guard Cornelius, at first a strict order, then a vow she embraced with fierce devotion. Santos tore into their lives with merciless cruelty, leaving scars that never healed. Togo and Leo Corliss sat down in the dining hall, dug in, and the first bite slammed into them, shockingly delicious. A hollow hush swallowed the room, and only Santos, his wife, and their son huddled at the table. Cornelia was nowhere to be seen, born illegitimate. She'd been shoved to the sidelines. The realization slammed into him, hollowing out a strange, aching solitude. Later that night, Togo paced the room, torn between creatures as each one clawed to be the one he'd draw. Nothing budged. Leo Corliss was convinced he dozed off over it. Togo heeded the advice and sank onto the futon to sleep, but thoughts clawed at his mind, and right then the door creaked. Cornelia slipped inside on silent feet, her eyes blazing with excitement. She stormed back to honor her vow and unveil her treasure to him. In an encyclopedia that catalogs every mythical creature ever imagined. She tore through the pages in a blur, eyes sparkling as she triumphantly revealed each of her favorite creatures. She skidded to a stop before the fair illustration and burst into giggles. It looked exactly like Togo. Leokili agreed and Togo bristled, annoyance flaring in his eyes. Countless spirits wore his face in twisted guises, and each one slammed into him with an eerie, gut-deep familiarity. Once Faye looked at him and swore he was a fairy. Togo soaked in the moment and eagerly riffled through the book's other pages. He stood frozen before the griffin's illustration for what felt like hours, eyes glued as every feather and talon pulled him deeper into its spell. Cornelia still yearned for the breathtaking grace of Pegasus and unicorns. She gushed eyes alight that some ancient ones bore both wings and. Her eyes flared as she pointed to an even rarer creature, lightning bathing its form and crackling along both wings. She read that the alicorn is a divine messenger who wields lightning, and from that moment thunder couldn't scare her. He replayed the forest meeting in his head and a cold jolt hit him. He'd seen this exact scene before. Doubt not at her, was that really an alicorn? Cornelia's eyes glittered with fierce love for every mythical creature. The red dragon also claimed her heart. The encyclopedia's entry crushed all hope. Those legendary creatures no longer exist. Sorrow pooled in Cornelia's eyes. She cursed that she hadn't been born sooner to meet them. She pictured herself plunging into the water, laughing and splashing playfully beside the weaver. She buried her hands in clouds of fur, petting the fluffy creatures and cultivating a carbuncle as her imagination rocketed skyward. I sink into a bed of phoenix feathers, drifting off as a phoenix lifts me and we rocket into the sky. He caught the quiet despair woven through her voice the moment she shared her desire with him. Cornelia's future had already been decided. She had agreed to marry a man 30 years older, the marriage set to occur before her 16th birthday and his 46th, a reality that struck like a thunderbolt. Cornelia's voice sliced the silence, courage born from being backed into a corner with no escape. As night tightened its grip, she flashed a polite smile, murmured her excuse, and melted into the shadows. She swallowed her fear and dared to ask, "Can I come back tomorrow?" Compassion flooded him and resolve hardened his jaw as he opened his arms and warmly beckoned her back. After she left, he snatched the sketchbook and ripped into the page, drawing like a man who'd already chosen the creature he was going to bring to life. Leocoralus locked onto the sketch and demanded, "Why did he pick this one?" Togo snapped, insisting they believed it was right. He wasn't just thinking about sketches, the magical reserves of that were bleeding dry, so he had to orchestrate his next move with ruthless precision. He still had to face Leocoralus and settle the matter. The next morning at breakfast, Santos slammed out, demanding an update on the investigation into the legendary beast. He'd already decided. He proposed summoning the phoenix. The legendary firebird, the immortal bird of Santos' grind, recognizes that creature. That choice landed perfectly, a flawless fit for their esteemed family. Santos greenlit Phoenix's challenge and barked the order. Tomorrow the Tinatovs will be dragged before the entire family. He holed up in the tent all day, tinkering and fine-tuning every piece of gear for the call, and by evening everything was ready. The waiter set the food down, and Leokvilla flashed a casual grin as he greeted his old friend. They leaned in, asking how she was holding up. She replied, calm as ever, that she was managing. And Tovo burst out of the tent. The room snapped awake and crowned him its new master. Leocoralus staked his reputation on him. He might be a tad distracted and distant, but he was a damn good craftsman. Inside, the rooms bowed to a different mistress, Cornelia. A sudden bolt of certainty hit her. The girl had attended Frekvenlu. He convinced himself nobody had noticed. Interior hadn't seen Lee Cornelia beam like this in ages, not since her engagement was confirmed. Crushed by sorrow, she folded inward and deep in her soul bowed before him with fierce, trembling gratitude. Gratitude burning in her chest for the small joy he'd gifted her young master, she stepped forward and asked for a favor. Interior burns to become Cornelia's guardian. Had the contract been fulfilled, she'd have been torn away from Cornelia, plunging Cornelia back into loneliness. Dread slammed into her when she realized she already had almost no allies left. Leocoralus leaned in, eyes cold, and shot the question at her, "Do you want to cancel the contract?" Her organs betrayed her, collapsing under the weight of loyalty to Cornelia. She clung to him, begging to be allowed to stay. He never intended to leave her. Togo wouldn't abandon Cornelia either, and Interior reeled. Leocules motioned coolly, insisting his master was exactly that, excessively kind, achingly gentle. He never meant to stay. Every move was a calculated sprint toward escape. The next morning, the entire summoned family surged into the calling hall, joined by Cornelia and Interior. Out nodded Santos, but his jaw hardened. He'd promised, and he'd see it through. The call will thunder before the great family. Just before the ritual began, Togo slid a pendant set with a massive, humming magical stone into Cornelia's hand. She stared at it, riveted. They clutched their heads, desperate to pin down its worth and purpose. Togo just snapped that she'd need it. Right on cue, he began to call the phoenix forth. I hoisted a canopy like a black curtain, plunging the whole process into shadow so nobody could watch. This was mine alone. He guarded his secret gift, making paintings burst into life behind a calm, unreadable face. The call exploded to life. The phoenix portrait sat ready, and one savage stroke sealed the ritual. The instant his brush kissed the canvas, a powerful, harmonious melody exploded through the room, then a crystal-clear chirp pierced the air. Phoenix's cry ripped the air, every soul knew it, and behind the tent the blazing silhouette of the bird flared into view. Santos erupted with joy, catapulting the moment into something unforgettable. I burn with eager anticipation, my gaze locked on the magnificent phoenix's arrival. Rato erupted with excitement, but when Togo finally emerged from behind the curtain, they stumbled on a creature, and it wasn't what they'd expected, a phoenix and a baby. Santos stopped dead, breath stolen as the sight before him knocked the wind out of him. Joy exploded across Cornelia's face as she lunged to touch the tiny phoenix, utterly captivated to finally meet her favorite mythical creature. Now shrunk down, glowing with warmth and utterly irresistible. Santos seethed, satisfaction nowhere in sight. He honored the contract and unleashed a creature as rare as a red dragon. To Santos, the phoenix meant nothing, a hollow formality that conferred no authority, packed no punch in battle, and wasn't even worth selling. Togo ripped off the mask of deceit and exposed Santos. He never cared about the phoenix itself, he only wanted to sell it. Everything unfolded exactly as he'd schemed with the red dragon. He was about to keep going when the little phoenix flared up and made its own decision. The phoenix jabbed its blazing beak into the magical stone on Cornelius's pendant and, in a heartbeat, became one with the gem. The summoned beast pledged itself to Cornelia as its mistress. Because she was of the Duran line, the contract's final clause snapped shut and the phoenix was theirs. Rudder seethed, convinced Cornelia had snatched Phoenix right out of his hands. Brett froze as the creature slammed forward, a snarling wall of fury shielding its chosen master. Rage boiled in Santos as he snapped his fingers. A grimy metal band cinches her throat, her insides buckling as searing agony floods her, an electric jolt screamed through her body. Her screams ripped through the room, igniting Cornelia and the locals into white-hot fury, but they stood frozen and powerless to act. Santos slammed a ruthless ultimatum at Togo: call forth the true Phoenix now, or watch the interior regions spiral into ruin. Pain seared her, but every thought clung to Cornelia as helplessness crushed her. Just when hope flickered out, he rested a gentle hand on Cornelia's back. He channeled a jagged surge of magic that ripped the pain away. Santos, baffled, snapped his fingers at the metal bracelet to kick its magic alive. Nothing. He snapped again, still nothing. The pen slammed down, the final signature blazing, the contract sealed, and the interior's ownership officially passed into Togo's hands. The Slavic metal ring obeyed only his magic, rendering it powerless against her. The interior territories lay beyond Santos's control. Togo's gaze hardened. He locked onto Santos and, voiced like a blade, warned him never to harm his people again. Years ago on Earth, Togo's teacher hammered into him that preparation was the only thing that mattered. The moment you spot the thief, whip out the rope and coil it tight, ready to strike. Or dash out and buy a bookshelf before you touch a single thing in the room. Plan ahead. Togo masterminded every step at Duran's residence. Santos barked the order, Togo summoned Phoenix, and once the contract was sealed, Interior's property officially transferred into Togo's hands. Everything that bound him fell away. Togo had no reason left to stay. Santos refuses to walk away empty-handed. He implores Togo, desperation raw, to summon another creature. He swore he'd pay whatever it took. Santos asked, and Togo shot back a firm yes. He delivered a blunt warning. He couldn't promise the creature would bond with Santos. Togo masterminded this move, priming everything for the next step. The Okula's moment had arrived. We had to unmask their plan. Earlier, Togo summoned a creature onto the page for the locals. Forged alongside the phoenix, this battle-born beast was tailor-made for a warrior. It erupted into the alicorn, a winged horse, a divine messenger crackling with lightning. The instant Togo finished the last stroke, the creature burst into life. The sky detonated into blinding streaks of golden lightning, the air shuddered, and everyone froze, eyes wide in stunned awe. The alicorn tore into sight, lightning screaming around it, regal and brimming with unstoppable power. That energy ripped through the air like a god's blade, and all of Santos burned with obsession for that legendary being. The locals surged to Togo, checked him with pounding hearts, and roared with relief when they found him unharmed. As Togo kept talking, Santos whipped out a gleaming high-grade magic stone, baiting Alacorn into becoming his summoned creature. It was a fatal mistake. The alicorn's lightning atomized the so-called best stone into dust. The trinket fizzled against the creature, it stood unbowed. Alicorn's irritation with Santos boiled over, and the confrontation erupted into full-blown chaos. The alicorn tore open the sky and launched a crackling bolt of lightning that split the air and hurtled straight for Santos. Alicorn's fury tore free, Togo's pleas couldn't touch it, and a flash of memory hit Leo Corliss, the shield Togo had given him. This wasn't a mere shield, it was forged from a material they'd never used before. Togo's gift for bending the impossible into reality forged a feather-light, unbreakable shield that simply shrugged off magic. Leo Corliss clutched his shield and braced as Togo bellowed that Alicorn was charging in like lightning. The creature lunged, its glowing skeleton spearheading straight for Santos. Leo snapped into action, planting his shield to absorb the alicorn's destructive force and neutralize the blow. It didn't just repel swords and arrows, it sapped the strength from spells themselves, earning its place as the most powerful shield ever forged. Chaos erupted, slamming Leo Corliss into being the first to defend alongside Santos, the very person he never wanted to pick. He had no other option. He shoved Santos aside as a fierce midnight pride exploded in his veins, and he knew he couldn't back down from taming Alicorn. Just as everything teetered on the brink, the alicorn froze, sniffed the air, then glided toward Leo, its eyes drilling into him. Confusion carved across Leo's face as he stared at Togo, who gave an odd shrug like the beast had just caught a scent. Seizing the opening, Leo lunged forward and fired the question at Alicorn, "Will you become my summoned beast?" Leo Corliss thrust Togo's enchanted stone forward. The creature snarled a deep green no that sliced the air. The alicorn refused and slammed its head against the shield. In a heartbeat, its form unraveled into pure lightning and fused with the shield. Right then, Leo's eyes snapped to a concealed, pulsating magical stone sunk into the shield Alicorn had just claimed as his new home. The mission hit its mark. Leo Corliss wrestled the wild Alahornis into submission and claimed the towering riding beast as his steed. Santos crumpled to the floor, his gaze lost in the empty abyss as the twist of events left him utterly shattered. Near the call room, Interior panted with ragged breaths while Cornelia hovered at his side, worry blazing in her eyes. For a heartbeat, the Interior went dark like its D just passed out. Even as Cornelia demanded she rest. Time vanished, they bolted in a frantic dash for freedom. Last night, a self-styled spy appeared and demanded Interior meet her in the garden. She gripped the very thing that should have opened their escape, and the real gut punch hit when inside she checked her metal bracelet. It was broken. Chloe exploded into view. She was the spy who'd been lurking right beside us the whole time. They waited, poised to drag anyone inside out to safety. The Interior's ruined state turned every movement into a treacherous struggle. In the call room, control ripped from Santos as the summoned creature broke loose and madness began to devour him. Rage detonated inside him, and he hurled himself at Togo. Leo Corliss lunged in and cut him off the instant Santos's hand shot out. Shadowy tentacles exploded from Santos's palm, snaking outward and lashing through the air. Leo dove out of the way by a hair, adrenaline screaming, and it hit him. This was the exact same ability the man who kidnapped Togo had used before. Before Leo could react, Alicorn answered with a roar as a lightning bolt tore from his shield and seared the shadowy tentacles. The alicorn erupted into view, not a passive challenge but a ferocious beast crackling with electricity, its fury aimed straight at Santos, so broken he couldn't even feel fear. Santos stood ready to fight, resolve hard as steel. If he didn't summon the creature, no one would survive. Thunderous explosion ripped right through the top of the recruitment room's wall. When Chloe arrived, she smashed a jagged hole in the wall and burst through a spray of plaster and dust for a show-stopping entrance. The instant he saw her, Santos slammed to a halt, frozen solid. Togo shoved the alicorn's reins into Leo Corliss's hands so he could ride. With the contract sealed, Togo tore away as they escaped, not even glancing at Santos. They abandoned him as he screamed and cursed them, swallowed by crushing despair. He unleashed his true fury on Khlo for betraying him. Were he evaporated, she'd severed every tie. Above, Cornelia, Interior, and Little Phoenix had already taken off. Cornelia rode the Pegasus with a grin that lit the sky. She's finally seizing the dream she's chased her whole life. Insecurity churned inside her, and Chloe zeroed in on the trembling doubt. He gripped her hand, voice steady and fierce. "You chose this path yourself, there's no turning back now." The magic of that flickers on its last ember, leaving them one desperate choice: race home and finally be safe. Togo jolts awake, confusion clawing at his mind. Joy surged through him as Cornelia barreled toward him, her eyes glittering with excitement. When the truth hit him, he found he'd dozed off inside the Phoenix, now grown huge, pillowy, and impossibly cozy. Cornelia and Togo drank the moment in. Togo snapped awake and found himself back in the hammock with a tiny phoenix perched on his chest. A nearby alicorn sprang to life, scooped him up, and hurled him home. Leo Corliss burst outside and froze. Togo had blinked awake after 6 days of slumber. Panic slammed into him at the thought of contacting Faye, but Leo Corliss had already handled it. Faye left a message telling Togo to reach out when he recovers. His reply died on his lips as Cornelia burst in, tears streaming down her face, and slammed into him with a fierce, desperate hug. Anxiety roared in her chest. She admitted she was terrified the moment Togo collapsed from magical exhaustion. Relief cracked her voice as she thanked him once more for saving her and her master. The Interior clawed at the shadows, begging to be swallowed by the forest. They bolted, tearing away from danger. It didn't hunger for food or plead for shelter, only safety, and Toga coldly denied it. She roared that she deserved proper nutrition, a warm bed, and that every single one of her needs be met. A humble, quiet wish pulsed inside him, that Interior and Cornelia would find joy. The Interior's focus splintered, and Santos pounced, naming her Cornelia's guardian. He was sworn to shield her until she reached marriageable age. Remembering Cornelia as a child fills me with boundless joy. She was a wild spark who darted everywhere and scaled trees like they were staircases, driving the grown-ups into constant worry. Helpless, she watched as Cornelia's brother cracked her with a brutal slap and spat venomous insults. Cornelia refused to shed a single tear. She kept that steady smile like nothing could touch her. Santos's gaze snapped to Cornelius's injury. Fury flared and he blamed the Interior. They slammed searing electric jolts through the metal bracelet on her wrist, each blast shredding her nerves and wringing a cry from her. Cold as stone, he tossed Cornelia's life aside as worthless, a pitiful price to secure his daughter's safety. Doubt clawed at her. Did she still have a purpose as a knight? Memories of Lekkas who'd sacrificed so much, even the Golden Land, surged through her, then shattered the moment Cornelia called her name. As chaos closed in, Cornelia held an unwavering smile that stole everyone's breath, sparking fierce admiration and wide-eyed awe. Cornelia still flashed the dignified smile of a lady of the house, even though she deserved far better. Her father, brother, mother, and even the servants shunned her with icy indifference. Since Interior arrived, Cornelia exploded with joy over even the tiniest moments. She refused to linger on her struggles and hunted down every scrap of joy she could find. Interior pledged every ounce of himself to her. Cornelia wasn't a duty to tick off. She stormed into rooms and sculpted them into art like a true interior design master. Interior would burn her world to ash and hand over every last piece of herself to guarantee her master's happiness. After a relentless, soul-crushing ordeal, their tireless struggle finally exploded into hard-won triumph. Reality slammed into her. She wasn't alone. When she realized others cared about her happiness too, relief crashed through her and tears streamed down her face. At last, the Interior snapped into its rightful place. Even amid that burst of joy, Togo froze, mind racing as he pictured what would happen once they slipped into hiding. The Interior announced that the moment her family was thrown behind bars, she and Cornelia could finally bolt off together on a carefree journey. Shock slammed into him, and Leo Corliss leaned in and spilled more details. They accused the family of backing Rigward's poachers. Chloe produced evidence in. If the court rules against them, the family could see their status ripped away. Cornelia would emerge unscathed. Her family tossed her aside as if she were nothing. They flat out refused to pin their crimes on her. Togo ripped up her slot contract and Cornelia exploded into action, free at last. Gratitude surged through the Ministry of Internal Affairs for this. Worry clawed at Toho as she raced through Cornelius's feelings, desperate to know if she was truly okay in this situation. He soon saw it was pointless, and Cornelia felt no sympathy for her father or brother, convinced they deserved every one of their troubles. He harbored a power that shattered everyone's expectations. Moments later, Togo and Leo Corliss stormed up to the Regard mansion on Alicorn. The fairy sprang forward, relief pouring off her as she grabbed Tovo and beamed at the sight of him safe. The fairy staggered under his own problems until his razor-smart secretary swept in and solved them all. But the secretary was already dressed. She flashed in for a heartbeat, then darted back into the forest to resume her work as a model beneath the canopy. Inside, they sank into chairs with steaming teacups, laughter bubbling as easy banter flowed between them. All hell broke loose the second Fae remembered Togo's contract with the Red Pumpkin family. If Togo signs on as their official artist, Fae could swoop in and shield them. They warned him that talking to anyone who wielded that ability would drag him straight into danger. The real danger hit when he shot to blazing fame among his own. Fae confessed, guilt tearing at him for dragging Togo into this chaos. He felt no regret. Fae had hurled him straight into the orbit of Leo Corliss and Cornelia. The delay stretched into the night, so he crashed there and unleashed his answer the next morning. Alone in Togo's room, doubt gnawed at him as the idea of turning painting into a career loomed like an impossible mountain. Leo Corliss rapped the door, instantly catching the tremor of hesitation in Togo. Leo Corliss, fed up with running away, leaned in and urged him to start talking. Urged by his teacher, Togo poured his heart out to Cohen. Painting was his lifeblood, but the moment it became a job, anxiety clenched his chest. He wielded a brush whenever he wanted, refusing to let it become his profession. The Ricard family's demands tightened like a vice, dragging him deeper into paralyzing indecision. Leo Corliss kept drilling Togo with questions. Was he terrified of failing to meet expectations, crumbling under financial strain, or watching his passion for painting die? He froze, every muscle locking as realization slammed into him. He could be the linchpin for all of this. Selling his work sent cold panic racing through his veins. He dreaded drawing twisting into a crushing chore that would steal the joy he poured into every stroke. Disgust snapped at him every time he faced a canvas, and the thought that he hated the thing he loved most tore him apart. To earn recognition, he'd have to forge exceptional skill. The idea of fame hit him like a cold wave, panic flooding his veins. And Leo Corliss broke the silence and fired the crucial question. Togo's heart burned with one dream, crowd standing awestruck before his paintings. Those words slammed into Toa, yanking him back into old memories and igniting a raw, paralyzing fear. She crushed his dream of going to art school with a single sneer, dubbing it pointless. Since childhood, he forged himself into what others demanded, snuffing out his own desires. His teacher's words exploded in his head. You truly love to draw, and the truth hit him like a lightning bolt. His teacher's voice replayed in his mind, fierce and steady, insisting that even a failed creative career could still hold meaning. A fierce thought shattered his crushing doubts. He finally saw he had to seize the freedom to paint and carve out a life on his own terms, even if it meant risking everything. That afternoon after lunch, Toga shrugged off his anxieties and a raw, honest grin burst across his face, a smile Leo Corliss had never seen. Resolved like iron, Togo barreled into the yard to confront Faye. He lunged with the question, "What do you want from me?" and Faye answered simply, short, sharp, and unmistakable. He relished every conversation with Togo and cherished their friendship like a rare treasure. He pinned his hopes on Togo's untapped artistic potential. Faye vowed to turn his estate into a gallery, lining every hall with Togo's paintings. Togo's portrait seared into his mind and pushed him to hunt down every other work Togo had made. No matter what Togo truly is, they drenched him in honeyed praise while secretly betting his abilities would crumble. Even after art school, countless artists still clawed and scraped just to reach success. He froze, breath shallow, mind racing as he tried to make sense of the mess he'd landed in. Faye scoffed at his worries, snapping that art lived in influence and passion, not mere skill, and that the loudest voice usually won. If Togo doubted himself, Faye vowed to bellow how brilliant Togo's paintings are. Shock froze him, then a tiny, crooked smile crept across his lips as he admitted he often failed and left trouble in his wake. Faye stood unshaken, calm roaring in his veins, even as he couldn't promise that would come out safe. Base pitched Rocastle as the shortcut to victory, but Toga scoffed and rejected a guaranteed win. He hungered for someone to shoulder every mistake and disappointment with him. That understanding drew them close, and they put on a show of support, swearing they'd follow him wherever his journey led. The next morning, honey gold light flooded the room as Togo peered out and murmured that the morning sun wore the fluffy yellow of a chick, while Leo slept on, still dozing. When he was called, he snapped the phrase back like a fired bullet. Leo froze, bewilderment sparking in his eyes. His breath hitched under the warm light. Togo looked like a freshly hatched chick. Small and shaky with doubt, they burned to step out and face the world. Far away, two shadowy figures went silent as the crushing news hit. Jiren couldn't recruit Togo. Figures watched Jiren falter, unfazed, and surged forward to take matters into their own hands. Just then, the same doctor who'd examined him at the Regard estate burst in, slamming a report down. The Regard family had fired him. They slammed the lid on his access to the vital files. Now they must hatch a daring plan to pry the missing intel loose. The doctor dropped a bombshell. He'd signed a contract with the Regard family. He oozed artist energy, but the rest of his life slipped away into a blur. A figure, a crown-like ornament glinting on their brow, scoffed that the would-be great mage would never stoop to being a mere artist. The bearded man's eyes flared at the raw talent, and he moved to claim him as his artist. They counted down the seconds, hearts hammering, desperate to finally meet. When Togo embraced being an artist, time blurred into a rush, yet old habits clung. He still spent hours sketching in a forest that had burst alive with color. Cornelia, eyes blazing with excitement, grabbed Togo's arm and whisked him aside. For an outdoor lunch, her excitement swept us up, and a small table stood ready, already laid out for the occasion. Chloe and Interior hustled in the kitchen, whipping up dishes as the house hummed with the warm, neighborly buzz of a real block party. The forest had morphed into a tidy neighborhood. On the right, Chloe's house sat proud, and directly beside it, Togo's two-story home shot up. Sandwiched between two brand-new houses, the building where Cornelia and Terrier live holds its ground. Just before the meal, Togo and Cornelia sprinted next door to lend a hand. Chloe thrust the suit into their hands with a grin, treating the whole job like child's play. Togo returned to find Interior wrestling with a mountain of laundry, clueless where to stash it, until Togo spotted something buried in the heap. Catching his underwear tangled among the clothes, he snatched up the pile and snapped that he'd handle it himself. The Interior blurted an apology, pleading she only wanted to help. Best of all, they let her ride out the chaos until the situation finally settled. Her breath caught when she realized they'd built her a house without so much as asking, and shock slammed into a strange, comforting warmth. When the dust settled, the group spilled outside for lunch, enjoying each other's company as Chloe announced she'd deck her home with paintings and planned a trip to Togo later. Cornelia leapt at the chance to join. He vowed she'd join us the moment the meal ended. They surged up to Togo's second floor and spilled into his private gallery. His finest paintings blazed along the walls, and he swept his arm wide. "Choose any," he urged. Choosing felt impossible, so many options swarmed around, each one screaming to be picked. Leo Corliss zeroed in on the painting teeming with green plants. Togo's eyes snapped wide, it totally clashed with his taste. Leo Corliss echoed Togo's phrase, calling it food for the soul, and he believed it with every fiber of his being. Clown, muster thought and make your choice. She chose the watercolor work, unable to resist its soft, translucent glow. Cornelia froze, shock ripping through her as everyone else had already made their choice. Inside, the portrait of the young Mrs. Cornelia dominates the room, her youthful gaze daring anyone who enters to look away. At last, Cornelia locked onto a painting where mythical creatures, birds, deer, and hares mingled. It fit her perfectly. Shame pricked him and joy swelled in his chest, yet a grin broke across his face. This was his life now, an artist among friends who prized his work, and for the first time everything felt right. Cut to the Regard estate, a magnificent portrait of the Regard family, painted by Togo, hangs front and center, reigning from its place of honor. Leo Corliss barreled in, dragged by the scent on her face and an urgent letter, only to see the crisis deflate. It was just a request for a new painting. The Regard family guests clamored for a hallway painting to greet visitors with a warm embrace and demanded it be painted by him. He faltered, heart hammering and doubt clawing at him as he faced his first official assignment. They demanded he at least hear the proposal. In the estate of Togo, I locked eyes with a guest named Sapphire Kori Isiola. A brilliant young heir of the Asian territory, lightning smart and forever at his family's side as their unshakable ally. He's linked to a former schoolmate of Rosetta. He barked that they toss the formalities aside for him. Sapphire froze, utterly mesmerized by Togo's art. He stood riveted by the hallway painting of a unicorn and Pegasus, drank in the living room's serene landscape, then froze before the Regard family portrait. Every piece slammed into them, but none hit harder than the dream painting in the Faye's room. Faye named it Uran, a towering symbol of great dreams. Moved to her core, Sapphire burned to meet him face to face, and trembling with excitement, she blurted out a daring plea to summon him. Once they'd broken the ice, they dove straight into the project, and he unveiled 3 paintings to Sapphire. They worshipped every single one, yet couldn't bring themselves to choose a single favorite. Ever-practical Rosa snapped up a darker swatch and pressed it against Sapphire's sky-blue wallpaper to match. Sapphira made the call. She chose this. The canvas still lay half-finished, so he impulsively commissioned another painting. This new work mattered. He poured every ounce of himself into an angel painted to honor his newborn child. The baby arrived just a month ago, and his wife has thrown herself into his care with every fiber of her being. Art was her lifeline, and Sapphire was convinced Togo's works would lift her spirits. Curiosity blazing, Togo leaned in and asked, "Which angel did you imagine, Sapphira?" Sapphire's reply was a whisper of uncertainty, so the size became his call. It unleashes a mid-sized piece, a step-by-step painting crafted in the Machi style. He confessed he's head over heels for watercolor's gentle, whisper-soft washes. Once every detail was locked in, Togo sealed the deal and accepted the order. They set out to craft a piece that danced with the sky-blue wallpaper and carried the warmth of the Sapphire's request. Togo fought the blank page, her pencil stuttering. She couldn't draw an angel because she had no idea what one should look like. He goaded Faye into roasting him for signing onto the job with zero clarity. She blurted that the angels were Wayne beans, halos gleaming above their heads. Always on guard around people, they keep their heart under lock and key, then every so often someone storms in and drops a blessing at their feet. Toga flung idea after idea into the room, then a new crisis crashed down. They had to pick who would pose as the angel. Bade flashes a wicked grin and shoots a cheeky proposal at Clow. Togo snapped a quick wave and declared, "Clues more devilish than angelic." Cornelia could be flawless, but in that moment she was racing away. Imagination alone won't cut it. Togo desperately needed a real model. Faye snapped, "By a Slavic person." They burst into Amelia Slow's dating agency. For Togo, it was his first time scouting a Slow to model. He plunged headfirst to unravel what slavery truly meant in this world. An old man stepped forward to meet them at the agency. He cried out that he needed an angel, but the man heard it all wrong. A flock of flirtatious women posing as angels swoops onto the screen, batting lashes and teasing the crowd. There they were, the very same faces Togo had crossed paths with before. He shot them down on the spot, insisting on someone with genuine angelic qualities. Faye burst into laughter at the confusion. Togo blurted he craved an angelic presence. The old man said a child would fit the role far better, and it made perfect sense. Amelia ran like clockwork, spotless and precise, yet its streets were utterly devoid of children's tiles. Every so often, agencies shipped in orphans from far-off cities. In 1945, most of them were packed off to live with foster families. It hits hardest in the sprawling metropolises, above all the capital, where the gap between the rich and the poor yawned like a canyon. In the capital, a boy tore through the streets, sprinting at breakneck pace. Two men barreled after the one who stole their money. He scowled at the pitiful take. Who was he and what drove him to steal? Heeding the old man's warning, Togo, Faye, and Leo charged up and crested the cap. The next day blasted in, uncertainty crackling in the air. Nobody knew what to expect. Cornelia and the others should have stood with us, but every path slammed shut and it was impossible. Clow, a former spy in the capital, and the others vanished into hiding, forced to lie low until the great family's affairs were settled. As the girls converged for their meeting, the year that strangely ignited a fierce fire inside Togo. They even toyed with slathering paint all over it. He, Faye, and Leo plunged into the bustling capital, its streets humming with vendors and a river of travelers. Its darker side bared its teeth in the narrow alleys where the poor and homeless lived. A razor-sharp chasm cleaved glittering wealth from grinding poverty. As they walked, Togo barreled into someone mid-stride and just kept going, totally oblivious. Before he could even check the bag, his money vanished and he screamed, panic exploding from him as Faye and Leo Corellis snapped to attention. They lock onto him as he darts through the crowd and vanishes into a narrow alley. They exploded into pursuit and the boy sprinted ahead like a living blur, almost impossibly fast. It hit him, he was going head-to-head with the aristocrats, or if not them, the rich foreign elite. He refused to back down. Audacity surged as he jeered while sprinting away, and the boy's barbs about the rich and their bodyguards cut deep. Togo's fury exploded. His thunderous roar summoned his beasts. The firebird lunged forward, cutting off the boy's path, while the firewolf stalked up from behind. Weaker endurance sapped its momentum. They burst onto the scene just as the Phase B group had a guy clutching stolen items cornered, and he refused to go down without a fight. The boy lunged but couldn't stop Faye from snapping the money stolen from Togo back in an instant. Everything looked fixed, but doubt coiled in the shadows. That one's gaze burned into the boy. He was skeletal and grime-caked, hunger gnawing at him after days without proper food, and you couldn't tell if he even had a family. Togo hesitated, and the boy's eyes locked onto an opening. His hand shimmered with wind magic as he lashed out, hurling a razor gust that screamed straight at them. The summoned beasts recoiled as the boy's attack screamed past and slammed into the wall behind them, narrowly missing the phase's head. Seizing the opening, the boy bolted forward, flung a rough hand signal, and melted into the alleys. It could shadow them, but the cost would swallow any gain. They slid his money back to him, and that was all he needed. The year had barely begun, the meeting left a bitter aftertaste, and the pursuit of the thief through the filth-choked alleys sputtered into failure. Interest ignited in Leo Corrales. Clever and battle-tested, the boy moved with hard-won savvy, nothing like your average street teen. Toho's gaze locked onto him with unnerving intensity. Leo Corrales had been right when they crossed paths earlier. Togo's gaze cut through the boy's grime and found something rare blazing in his blue eyes, steady dignity, iron resilience, and a hint of pride that gripped him. Faye and Leo Corrales locked weary gazes, let out one heavy sigh, and pressed their palms to their foreheads. They'd seen this coming. The fairy scoffed, shredding the idea that the boy was angelic, especially after he'd hurled those rude insults. The moment Togo locked onto someone, he latched on and never let go. The boy looked like an angel, sky-blue eyes, distrustful of people, and breathtakingly beautiful. They made the call. The hunt for the model was over. Trailing Togo, they barreled into the slot market. They thundered through the lively streets and burst into the capital's slob market, where inside a cavernous building, Faith, brimming with confidence, zeroed in on the perfect model. Grief tore through Togo. He still couldn't shake the loss of his angel. As they stepped inside, Faye, a bolt of sunshine, erupted into grin-filled quips, trying to snap him out of his gloom. A suit-clad, stone-faced businessman strides up and gives them a curt, no-nonsense greeting. Faye jabbed a finger and pointed the way from Amelia's Slav market. Soon the man unveiled baby sloths, tiny, blinking bundles that stole everyone's breath. There were far more of them than he'd expected, every single one pristine and eerily polite. He scrutinized them, and a cold, electric dread snapped through him. Something was horribly wrong. The children bubbled with naive cheer, turning the mess into a shelter instead of a filthy market. Then they spun around, baffled beneath him's unblinking, watchful gaze. Faye jabbed him with an elbow and shot the crowd a hard look. Does anyone here look angelic? Toko Poos mumbled that Nant would tell them to back off. But he couldn't touch them. He hammered into the fairies that angels must be careful with people. They oozed sweetness and innocence, politeness glued to every word. On the surface, they were good kids, probably. Restraint and razor-edge dignity snapped. Angels don't act like that. On the brink of surrender, his eyes snapped to a girl standing at the far end. She melted into the shadows at the edge, unlike the rest, quiet and guarded, her eyes betraying doubt, raw fear, and deep sadness. He closed in on her. The instant she spotted him, she froze, spun away, and lowered her head. She could pass for an angel, but reaching her felt like trying to catch moonlight. They left empty-handed, and disappointment was etched across that. Leo Corliss and Faye locked eyes. They had to settle this once and for all. Faye gave a hard nod, eyes drilling into him. She leaned in and snapped, "Is he ready to fully participate?" Puzzle flashed a sly wink at her. Faye flashed a sly smirk, told Angel they'd zeroed in on his alley, and urged them to hunt him down and seize him. Knowing Togo, he'll stop at nothing. He won't rest until he seizes it. In an instant, admiration flashed in Toho's eyes, and that single flare seized his curiosity. The instant he locked onto a goal, he charged forward like a freight train, completely unstoppable. A razor-sharp instinct read the room every time. With a clear goal, their mission was simple: snare the angel lurking in a filth-choked slum alley. The so-called angelic boy skidded to a stop before the half-collapsed house, poised to step inside. A searing yellow bolt ripped through the air. A few minutes later, someone shoved him out the door. He slammed onto the ground, groaning as pain ripped through him. Two hulking collectors materialized behind him, fists balled tight. They'd come to collect his unpaid debts. Despair swallowed him whole as he begged for more time. He declared his child is grinding nonstop, hauling in cash to crush the debt any day now. The collector snapped, flinging the excuses aside with a contemptuous sneer. This irresponsible father was beyond saving. Short on cash, hawk the child on the slot market and watch every problem vanish. The collectors vanished, leaving a man crumpled in the dust. The boy who'd been hiding nearby surged forward, anger coiling, but no surprise, his father, once again drinking in broad daylight, drowning in booze and waiting for easy money. The father spotted his son, didn't ask if he was okay, ignored him outright, and barked for cash. Ryan felt something inside him shatter. He'd long stopped seeing this man as his father. Silence snapped shut around him, forging his resolve. Ryan spun on his heel and tore away, sprinting until the world blurred behind him. It had to come from the one who was meant to protect him, the same person who coldly let him fall. Meanwhile, Togo and his crew tore down the main street, scouring every corner for the boy. The hunt went brutal when they realized this angelic boy not only distrusted adults but hated them with burning intensity. On the bustling market street, Togo strode alone in costly finery, a flashy target. A nimble pickpocket spotted him and in a heartbeat snatched his bag. This wasn't a random crime, it was a cold, premeditated strike, plotted down to the last detail. Earlier, Togo and his team hunted for a pickpocket boy to cast as the angel in their project. Clay would usually swoop in and take care of this, but they hatched a new plan. Make Togo the bait. That innocent face slapped a bullseye on his back. They swapped his clothes in a flash, shoved a bulging bag, heavy and stuffed with what looked like cash, into his hands and waited. Outgnawed his gut, but the plan detonated flawlessly. The pickpocket snapped at the bait and was caught in an instant as locals swarmed in and pinned him down with ease. The interrogation ignites, every question lands like a punch. He slammed a gleaming gold coin into the thief's hand, demanding information about the boy with blue eyes. The pickpocket was Leo Corliss. The capital had bombarded him with so many children that every face blurred together and he couldn't recall a single one. He waved them off, told them to look elsewhere, then turned and strode away. You can't pull a fast one on the locals. Their eyes zero in the moment they see Togo's bag clutched in his hands. They dragged him back, pried the item from his fingers and spat, "Don't get into trouble." Later, across the city, they cornered another pickpocket, a young man whose eyes shot wide and who instantly spiraled into panic. Once their breathing steadied, they tore into questions about the boy. Blue eyes flared, and this time they seized the upper hand. The boy blurted, "The child you're looking for is named Ryan." A fearless young man just burst onto the scene here. They couldn't track him down, his location was a total unknown. He smirked, holding the secret hostage, no payment, no answers. Before anyone could start the debate, he leveled a steely glare at the room and slammed down an even heavier pile of gold coins. The boy flashed a sly grin and said Ryan usually turns up each evening by the slob market. Armed with that, they locked onto their next destination. That evening, as the pickpocket boy said, Ryan was spotted near the Slavsky market, planted squarely in front of the building. His face was a blank mask, a flash of irritation in his eyes, and his thin wallet screamed he was short on cash. He barely had time to think when a scream shattered the air, and he whooped that they'd spotted Angela, his shout knocking the boy off balance. A skull fear seized Ryan and he bolted. Ryan lunged to reason with him, but the boy froze and couldn't listen. Despair ripped through Ryan and he fled, rushing straight to Faye for help. They summoned his beast, slamming it into Ryan's path and snuffing out any chance of escape. Wary from their last clashes, Ryan snapped into motion, twisting and darting so fast the attack whooshed past him. Leo Corliss lunged in, and Ryan froze as a colossal figure thundered straight at him. Ryan got caught red-handed in a heartbeat. Leo Corliss ensnared him in iron chains. Nobody could stand against that unstoppable force. Even in captivity, Ryan refused to submit, hurled furious curses, and fought on with savage ferocity. He kept his cool, hurting the boy wasn't his intent. He offered a deal. He declared, "I want to paint you." Confusion slammed into Rend, halting his resistance dead in its tracks. He declared he was the artist the Regard family had hired. They'd already heard about Ryan, and even though curiosity tugged at him, he kept his guard razor sharp. "If you want it that badly, go by the very stove," he sneered at. He absorbed the proposal, then insisted Ryan was one of a kind. No one else had that angelic face. A faint flush warmed Ryan's cheeks. He swallowed and ventured, "What do you want me to do?" He vowed he'd paint Ryan's portrait in 2 weeks, keep him fed and housed, and pay him. If Ryan wants, Togo will head straight to his location and get to work. One last question cuts through the silence. "How much will it cost?" Silence slammed over him, then Face cut in and asked, "How much do you need?" Ryan snapped 50 gold coins, a brutally steep demand. At first glance, greed wore the mask, something far deeper churned beneath. That wasn't a random sum, Ryan had a reason for that exact amount. Right as everything seemed settled, Leo Corliss crashed in and demanded, "Do you have parents or a guardian?" The question slammed the room into silence. Ryan Stefan barked for release, though he never intended to refuse a payday that fat. He insisted on consulting his guardian first. A bitter grimace split Ryan's face as he figured his father would probably sell him if someone offered a good price. When someone asked about his father's debts, Ryan snapped, irritation exploding into a furious roar. He'd never suspected his father was quietly borrowing from everyone, leaving a trail of IOUs in his wake. His father's booze-fueled gambling yanked Ryan into crushing debt. Ryan clawed his way through it, paying it off bit by bit to dodge being sold, yet his father kept cooking up new schemes to shove the debts even higher. They zeroed in on Ryan, eyes boring into him, and the accusation cut through, "You don't care about your father at all." Ryan's gaze hardened to ice. He didn't so much as blink. "I wouldn't have batted an eye if he'd burned in hell." His harsh truth slammed the room into stunned silence. The fairy darted to Togo and hissed, "There's a legitimate way out. It would demand every ounce of effort." While they were consulting, Ryan smirked and sneered, branded them fools, trusted no one, snatched the money, and vanished. Meanwhile, in the depths, Ryan's father slumped in a crumbling shack, drunk, the air thick and biting with vodka. He teetered on the edge of oblivion until a sudden knock jolted him back to life. His stomach roared, expecting a creditor. He flung the door open and came face to face with Ryan, flanked by Togo Faye and Leo Corrales. He strode in, announced himself with crisp formality, and requested permission to use Ryan as a model for his work. He sneered, crowed that Ryan was kin, then slapped on a syrupy, fake affection like a predator bearing a smile. Hippocrates, Ryan's fists clenched like iron and rage boiled in his veins, but he forced it down. He watched, saw his problems staring back, and bolted. The boy was trapped, unable to live freely. Venom and Ryan's earlier words seared into To's memory, refusing to fade. Ryan bore his father's merciless cruelty. It got worse. His demeanor snapped the second money hit the table. "How much do you pay?" Rage ripped through Togo. This was far more than simple negligence. His father stood ready to sell his son for profit, and the sight slammed a memory of teacher Togo into his mind. That creativity was once plundered and repurposed without permission. Signed contract in hand, the teacher from Togo sat eerily calm at first. "I'm charging at this problem," gunning to crack it with razor-sharp professionalism. They kept baiting and humiliating him until he snapped. His whole attitude flipped in an instant. His glare seared the room, no words needed. He readied himself to unleash every power he had to protect his job. Togo watched the same spectacle unfold. This time, the conjured thing wasn't a page but a living person, every eye and power snapping to them. Faye had already dangled a legal way to remove this man. He grinned, whipped out a document, slid it under the man's eyes, and spelled out the situation. Ryan's father snatched the paper, his eyes snapping wide as he tore through the lines. The document thundered that Togo had assumed every debt, his own signature sprawled at the bottom, and he went ghost white. He snarled that if the debt wasn't settled, he'd drag both the man and Ryan into slavery. Fear slammed into him, the man stammered as his confidence shattered, and Ryan exhaled. He finally bowed to the inevitable. It marked the end for him, a ruthless severing that split him cleanly from his father. He wouldn't give up quietly. Rage boiled in the father as he screamed curses and hurled filthy insults at him. Toho's patience snapped, his voice tore through the silence, steady like his teacher's, and he slammed down that no one could belittle him simply for being a casual artist. Ryan strode beside him, and any objections could be voiced openly. He still wielded the law like a weapon. Earlier, Fetch confessed to Luffold he'd ripped Ryan away from his father's side by paying off every debt that tied them together. They shot back, calling Ryan a Slav, a bizarre jab that landed dead center. He chewed on it, then locked eyes with Ryan and asked if he was in. Ryan didn't even blink. He jumped at the chance to go. He blurted out that Ryan should become his temporary slob. If the father reacts the right way, he'll fling Ryan free in an instant. Every move screamed one thing: get Ryan out. That evening, reeling from a brutal showdown with Ryan's father, Togo shoved through the crowd and into a massive, buzzing government building. He slammed Ryan's name into the record and officially branded him as his slob. While they waited, Faye, mind still stuck on that fiery clash with Ryan's father, blurted out a question about the speech Togo had delivered, and Togo laughed. He confessed he'd copied his teacher's exact method for resolving conflicts, and Faye and the locals reeled. Togo had never mentioned it before. Soon Ryan and his father arrived, tore through the registration, and Ryan's father stood there seething. Togo snubbed him, not sparing a single glance. The law stamped both Ryan and his father as citizens of Togo. He snapped that he didn't need his father, set him free on the spot, and slapped a single non-negotiable condition on his release. Don't you dare step toward Ryan unless he personally gives you permission. A bitter twist crossed his face. Accepting he was powerless, he turned and strode away. He spat at Ryan. You should have sold me. Ryan froze, his breath snatched and fists balled. He lashed out at his father, but Leo intercepted his blow. Mid-attack, he yanked Ryan's wrist and hoisted him effortlessly into the air. Leo's voice stayed calm but unshakable, hammering Togo's order, "Stay out of Ryan's life." Ryan's humiliated father recoiled in silence, broken. Leo sighed. He'd vowed not to meddle in family matters, but a sudden impulse hurled him into action. Faye and Togo's faces screamed they'd have leapt in if he hadn't, and Ryan froze, ripped between gratitude, relief, and disbelief. The group of four barreled back to the hotel they'd stayed in earlier and burst into the room. He spun to Ryan, voice eerily calm, and declared, "It's time for a bath." Confusion froze Ryan for a heartbeat, then panic surged and seized him. It explodes into a hysterical conversation about something as ordinary as bathing. Togo stepped in to help him bathe, and Ryan didn't mind. Embarrassment set his cheeks ablaze. His face flared red as he mumbled he wouldn't refuse to pay that, the odd remark hanging in the stunned silence. Before Togo could respond, someone yanked Ryan's shirt up. Silence crashed down as Ryan's back, riddled with raw, unmistakable scars, laid bare the truth the locals had long suspected, and suddenly every piece snapped into place. He wasn't chasing money alone, he was begging for proof he mattered. He felt like nothing, not the angel Togo had painted, and Togo barely flinched. Flashing a conman's smile, he brushed it off and demanded payment, claiming he only wanted to sketch him. Tenderness flickered in Ryan's gaze, then he slammed his feelings shut. He had to take a shower. Chaos erupted, water blasted everywhere as Ryan leaned in. Stubborn, he scrubbed his filthy hair with shampoo 4 relentless times. While Togo showered, Ryan gaped at the hotel's lavish shower, reveling in the silky rush of warm water. He obsessed over owning something like that in the forest. After the bath, he sank into the water and, for the first time in ages, relaxed so utterly that the world slipped away. The last spot clean, his true hair color just burst through. A brilliant halo burst around him, making him look every inch an angel. Later, Togo slipped Ryan into cozy pajamas and shepherded him to bed, Ryan's cheeks flushed with embarrassment while a shy, bright joy lit his face. He sank into his seat, leaned in close, and whispered, "Why does Togo do so much for me?" Everything clicked. Ryan had been shouldering his work, then Ryan abruptly stopped. He swore to himself he'd execute the job flawlessly. Those 50 gold coins tormented him. He'd cross any line and risk everything to snatch them, even after Togo had left. Ryan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, restlessness clawing at him as that kindness struck him cold and left his mind tangled. He didn't flinch, his aim stayed razor sharp. He needed money. The moment he snatches it, he bolts free, and his plan at last succeeds. He slipped up to Ryan, watched his breath slow and his lids droop into a real doze, then quietly slipped into the living room. Faye hesitated, instincts yelling that leaving him alone might invite disaster. He nodded, confidence blazing, and snapped that Ryan wouldn't escape until the money was in his hands. Leo Corliss bristled, unconvinced after watching Ryan's nimble fingers and wild unpredictability. They shrugged it off, pushed on with other matters, and the next day planned to buy Ryan the essentials. Bundle the clothes, stack the dishes, maybe even slip in something he'll like. You'd be stunned at how Ryan's obsession with money drives everything he does. Exactly 50 gold coins, he wanted them to the bone. This wasn't a vague desire, it was a razor-sharp obsession. The number was dead on. They exchanged grim glances, convinced something hidden was behind it. Then it crashed into Togo, the Slavic store. The little pocketbook practically screamed that Ryan kept showing up there. It wasn't a coincidence. The next morning at breakfast, they pointed at Ryan and caught him red-handed with a piece in his mouth. He froze, shock widening his eyes. He shot the question, "Is there anyone you want to buy?" and Ryan hesitated, scrambling to pivot the conversation away. But Togo wouldn't drop it. He'd already tailed Ryan to the Slavic store every evening. There a child fetches 50 gleaming gold coins. Ryan's face snapped taut, disappointment and guilt clawing at him while desperation burned in his eyes. Togo leans in, closes the gap, and slams down an offer. "I'll buy this person before anyone else gets the chance." He swore he'd haul them into the forest so Ryan could swoop back later and buy them back with his 50 gold coins. Fear and hope warred in Ryan's eyes. Finally he whispered, "It was my sister," his voice barely a breath. The truth ripped everything open. Their father sold the younger sister, and that's why Ryan has been stealing all this time. He planted his feet, knuckles white, eyes blazing with fury, poised to launch himself at Ryan's father. The truth exploded into the open, and only one thing remained. Toe Oster snapped, "Let's go," and they barreled straight to the Slav's store. They stepped inside to find the manager elbow-deep in suds, saying the place wasn't open yet. He just grinned and settled in, ready to wait. The manager's gaze snapped to Ryan and he muttered under his breath, "It's him." Ryan was a regular at the store. The manager swung the door wide, ushered them inside to wait, and pressed a steaming cup of tea into their hands. The move was brutal, especially for Ryan. His hands quivered as he clutched the cup, and at last the store swung its doors open. The manager spun on his heel and snapped, "Who are you looking for?" Ryan choked on his words, his voice raw and trembling with emotion. He painted a picture of a 7-year-old girl, sorrow raw in his voice. The manager nodded and sprinted after her, and Ryan's breath hitched as tears welled in his eyes. His breath hitched. The girl who stepped forward was the very one he'd seen yesterday, and the long-separated brothers and sisters crashed into each other's arms. The meeting slammed into Isekai'D, disbelief pinning her to the spot, and when Ryan saw her he crumpled, tears streaming down his face. Tears stinging his eyes, he bolted into her arms, clinging tight and choking out apologies for the long wait. Then he froze, breath snagging like his heart refused to accept the moment. Agnes burst into tears and clutched her brother like a lifeline, terrified he'd vanish again. Every evening, a small grin tugged at the manager's lips as he watched the elders press their faces to the window, eyes glued to the sky. How Ryan lurked in the shadows, his eyes locked on her. This tore the curtain open, laying bare why Angela sank into sadness yesterday and why Ryan plunged into despair. While the manager feverishly drafted the contract, Ryan, fingers dug into his sister's hand as if they'd never part, turned to him and whispered a ragged, heartfelt thank you. He waved it off with a laugh, declaring he was only a fledgling artist and this was his first time living in the Red Guard forest. Ryan declared himself Ryan Saris, and his sister stepped forward, hands shaking but utterly sincere. Ryan grabbed Ange's shoulders and swore it was Togo who'd bought her freedom and never stopped helping her, and Togo stepped forward to ask if she'd be comfortable living with them in the forest for a while. She faltered, then gripped Ryan's hand and vowed she'd be happy as long as she was with her brother, a sincere, open smile bursting across her face for him. Angela's radiant, innocent smile hit Togo like lightning, nearly stealing his breath. He came to claim one angel and two answered. A wildfire of artistic instinct ignites inside him, compelling him to paint both of his relatives. Later, in the bustling shopping district of Togo's capital, I tore through the stalls and snagged new clothes that gleamed with eye-popping color. He flashed a proud older brother grin as they strode side by side. Aang's fingers trembled as he tugged at his sleeve. Her heart thundered, she longed to greet her friend. They barreled back into Ryan and Angela's old house and found it eerily empty. Her friend wasn't in the house, she lingered in the yard. Ryan pressed his forehead to the glass and scanned the yard, confirming their father wasn't there. With the coast clear, they shove him through the tight alley and spill him into the backyard. Trash bags towered over it, smothering the spot and making it look like a dumpster. Chaos roared, but a lone fern flower blazed like a beacon. Anger crept closer, faltered, and gingerly reached out, then something extraordinary ignited. A tiny, winged creature with pointed ears shot out from the heart of the flower. It was a real fairy, and jaws dropped across the pier. Even the doubter who scoffed that fairies could exist in this world stood frozen, utterly speechless. Angel's friend, burning with a secret crush, stunned everyone by striking up an unlikely bond with Ryan. Togo lunged forward, every sinew straining to lay a hand on the fairy. It jolted back, then curiosity burning, it crept forward and gingerly sniffed his fingers. They locked eyes with him, then in a heartbeat they were gone. His gut hammered, he feared he'd spook the fairy, but Ange cocked her head when a whisper slithered into his ear, daring him to follow her. She vaulted onto the wall at the alley's end and strode along its narrow top. They trailed her down the winding path and, rounding the bend, came face to face with a breathtaking spectacle. Ahead of them unfurled a vast field of flowers, petals billowing in the wind in a hidden corner of the royal capital. Exhilaration surged through them at the discovery. The fairy burst into the flowers, followed by hundreds, maybe thousands, of glittering companions. Their wings flashed like sunlight slicing through the leaves, and Angel grinned, saying the fairy couldn't wait to introduce them to her friends. People swore Togo wore the forest scent like a living cloak. It thrummed with ancient forest magic beyond their understanding. They felt a spirit stirring inside. He had no clue what it meant, and in that moment indifference devoured him. He couldn't tear his eyes away as Ryan and Ange laughed, darting and twirling among the glittering fairies. A vision unfolded in a hidden glade, two angels whirled amid dancing fairies, a breathtaking, enchanted tableau so flawless it felt unreal. Tovo's artist's soul burned to paint every shimmering detail, but he refused to drag the fairies out of their hidden refuge. He cried out into the trees, asking if any fairies wanted to live with him in the forest. In a heartbeat, fairies whirled around him inside a glowing realm, their voices ringing crystal clear as they proclaimed it. A weird, electric chill crackled in the air, but the decision had already slammed shut. Soon, deep in the forest on the territory of Rigvard Clo, Gradito and his group recoiled as extra faces stepped out of the shadows. Cornelia's face exploded into an eager grin the instant she spotted another kid her age. Togo burst onto the scene and thrust Ran and Nanj into the spotlight, announcing them to everyone. Cornelia radiated a bright, unmistakable happiness. When the introductions ended, Clow and Interior sprang forward, showering everyone with warm, open-armed greetings. He ripped open his massive bag and thousands of fairies exploded out, frozen midair with eyes blown wide in stunned amazement. The fairies glided into neat rows, snapping into formation as if an unseen conductor had them on invisible strings. No one has ever glimpsed a real fairy, a whole swarm, unthinkable. Suddenly, light exploded through the canopy, flooding the forest with blinding brightness. Later, Togo wandered with a sketchbook in hand and perched in a quiet nook beside Leo Corliss's house. He flung open his sketchbook and unleashed a wild, relentless storm of lines, his pencil racing across the page. Each watercolor stroke landed with surgical precision and dragged me into complete immersion. He wielded his brush like a sword, slashing color across the walls until the house became a cozy, perfect home for Ryan and Angie. When Togo revealed it to the group, Ryan's jaw hit the floor. He insisted the house sat empty, they should be allowed to move in and live in peace. That evening, everyone surged into the new house for dinner, gathering around a simple meal. Ryan and Ange dove into their first real family dinner, nerves and excitement crackling in the air. As Ryan ate, he kept his gaze low, not because the food tasted bad, but because exhilaration pounded at his heart. He could have easily stayed put right here. He took one hard look and barked, "Rest until tomorrow." Ryan couldn't stay silent. He sprang up and vowed to scrub, wash, and tackle any household chore from cleaning to laundry to repay him. He couldn't shake it. Togo had paid his way, and the angel had bought them clothes, a house, and a peace. It slammed into Rhea like a tidal wave. She couldn't hold on. Silence swallowed the room as Togo admitted he didn't fully grasp the Slavic system, then insisted sharply, "Paying money doesn't make it your property." He lived for one thing, to paint their portraits. He wouldn't brand them slaves, the Almighty called them angels. The clown cackled, leaned inches from Ryan and grinned, "Don't worry, it's just Togo's way." The Interior gave a hard nod and declared, "The heart of that is too big, and it's hurting him." Ever-cheerful Cornelia swooped in with a grin, declared a child's only job was to eat, then just nodded off. Cornelia challenged them to play, grow strong, and become true adults. Her words sparked Ryan and Anya, and their faces flared into bright, determined smiles. Leo Corliss flashed a grin and quipped that anyone who wanted to help would be handed tasks ripped straight from the drawings. So far, it felt like the best plan they'd hatched. Hours slipped by when Togo checked Ryan and Angela's room. The little girl lay fast asleep. Maybe for the first time in ages, safety settled over her like armor. Confusion exploded in Ryan. He still couldn't fathom why Togo had set all this in motion. Togo broke his silence, laying bare the story of the man he called teacher, the one who had raised and cared for him. She cooked for him, taught him, and gave him a home, so his life became joyful. Maybe the torch now falls to Togo. Helping Ryan wasn't just an act of kindness. Selfish, sure, it was his bid to snatch back what the teacher had given him. At that, Ryan's face melted into a soft, tender expression. A fragment of sense hit him, but the rest slipped stubbornly beyond his reach. One truth blazed: he wasn't ordinary, gentle at heart, and delightfully offbeat. That time, with Ran at his side, they exploded into laughter and soaked up the peaceful night. Ryan crashed into bed and let sleep swallow him whole. He summoned him with a raw, grateful cry, thanking him for the first time in his life. Togo stepped outside when a local suddenly reached out and tenderly patted him on the head. He admitted that the moment he stepped in, the same doubts that haunted Ryan gnawed at him. When life slammed you down, a sudden kindness hit like a bolt of light, completely out of place. Day by day the sting loosens, until accepting this becomes almost effortless. That simple solace sank into him and steadied his heart. The next morning, sunlight sliced through the forest canopy and jolted the place awake as children tumbled and laughed, while Teresa cranked out icy snow cones inside the hollowed tree trunks. He planted himself nearby, eyes alight as he envisioned the composition for his next painting. An angel descended in a blaze of light, laying a luminous hand on the newborn and pouring a radiant blessing over them. The air felt off. Ryan stepped forward, caught sight of the sketch, and asked about it, curiosity blazing. The spark hit Togo. He hatched a plan and urged Ryan to try blessing someone, and Ryan froze, baffled. They barreled in to clarify and laid it out. Togo was stuck because he couldn't actually feel what a blessing was, and Ryan flat out admitted he didn't know how to bless someone. Suffocating hush choked the group while they chimed in that it's like sending someone a burst of pure happiness. A simple explanation slammed into him, and everything clicked. No fireworks needed. The blessing bloomed from pure, heartfelt sincerity. Ryan, a former pickpocket, trembled with doubt and insecurity, his mind racing as he hunted for a way to bless someone. Beneath his stoic mask, warmth surged in his chest for the people around him. At first he, like the wealthy and the grown-ups who have backed him for years, bristled at that strange yet honest joy, and that bristle sparked a fierce fire inside him. Ryan, cheeks flaming, fumbled through a barely audible blessing over everyone in the forest of that. Togo grinned ear to ear, triumphant. He'd channeled the very heart of the angelic blessing. The next day Cornelia's eyes lit up like fireworks when she saw the outfit sketch, and she declared it perfect for an angel because of the frilly edge. Fueled by Cornelia's advice, Togo slammed the angel costume's design across the finish line. When Ryan and Angie finished dressing, they strode out like they'd stepped straight from ancient Greece, noble and elegant, their costumes hugging them with flawless, regal precision. And he still clawed at Ryan even in his own. This blows past the earlier pitches that showed angels completely naked, and people actually called that a success. They moved into a sprawling house where Togo claimed a room and turned it into a painting studio disguised as a guest room. He turned one ordinary room into a breathtaking, dream-soaked stage. The enormous cloud-soft bed drowned in pillows and drifting feathers, and dead center a basket sat, staged like an angel's nest. Ryan slid into the soft bed beside Angel, but he fidgeted and kept staring away. He'd rather be anywhere but here. The drawing session kicked off. Aang sank back into the pillows with unnerving calm, while Ryan gripped the angel's nest like it was the world's last treasure. Their positions snapped into place, so Togo barked, "Don't move for 10 minutes." With every stroke of his pencil, he summoned an angel bestowing a blessing on a newborn, delight lighting his eyes as the scene leapt to life. Knees clenched Ryan as he muttered sin under his breath. They shout, "Is it done? It's not even close." He completely blanked, left the wings undrawn, and told Ryan to take a break and relax. Modeling crushed Ryan. It drained him faster and deeper than he'd ever imagined. At last they saw the painting, and Ryan and Angel were knocked breathless, awed even though it was still unfinished. Tender gleams and a radiant halo flooded the space with a holy glow, a blessing pulsing alive from the canvas. Ryan's eyes snagged on Togo's bare lids and he snapped, "Why didn't you paint your eyes?" Togo let out a long, weary sigh. He ached for that perfect, elusive shade of blue. None of his paints could match the exact shade seared into his imagination. He vowed to bleed the sky into paint and splash it across the angel's eyes. Ryan shoots a grin and urges Togo to slice the painting's eyes out and mount them in a frame outside. A soft chuckle slipped from his lips, then he dropped into a cold, crushing silence. The idea hit him. He slipped outside, silent as a shadow. Grab a sheet of paper and sketch a paint tube, render its crumpled metal, the twisted cap, and a bold streak of paint oozing from the nozzle. He sliced the label free, hoisted it skyward, and dared to hope it would work. He missed the crucial clue. Ryan and Ange watched every move. Awkwardness surged. He jerked his hands away and stammered that they should take a rest. The moment they left, Togo snatched another tube of paint and pierced a tiny hole in its label. He hoisted the drawing into the air, channeled his magic through its strokes, and it burst to life. The paper shrank, twisted, and reformed into a real tube of sky-colored paint. It sapped his strength and Togo's head spun. He learned the hard way that turning the sky into paint gulped far more magic than he'd bargained for, so he swore he'd never pull that stunt again. Clutching the perfect shade of blue, Togo sprinted home and dove straight into finishing the angel's painting, brush racing across the canvas. He plunged into his work, snatched up a brush, and painted with tireless, burning intensity. From dawn until late at night, he barely stopped, driving each deliberate stroke of his brush. Exhausted, he collapsed onto the floor and slept wrapped in a blanket. As morning light poured into the room, he dove back into painting, layering colors until the canvas woke, and when he touched the angel's eyes to life, a grin split his face. The work was done, and pride flooded his chest. He bolted for the Regard mansion, dead set on handing this straight to Sapphire. Sapphire unveiled the painting, hesitated for a heartbeat, masked his reaction at first. Then his eyes flared to life as the image hit him like a warm breeze on a cold morning. I was stunned. The shades of blue glowed like a warm hearth, flooding everything with cozy, contagious joy. Sapphire stood transfixed. He'd never seen an angel beam with such pure joy, and that light sent his spirits soaring. The painting seemed to have sprung straight from an actual brush with the divine. The payment arrived, and Sapphire shoved a gargantuan sack of gold into those hands. It dwarfed everything those had dared hope for. For the Sapphire, the work of art glittered with a value no price could touch. He wouldn't stop thanking Togo, burning to run home and shout the news to his family. Togo's first order exploded into a roaring success. Later in the forest, Togo slammed the promised 50 gold coins into Ryan's palm. It was enough to secure Ange's freedom and obliterate the slow contract. Ryan and Angel explode into unconditional freedom, no strings attached, yet Togo slides in with one small request. He begged them to stay longer to paint them again. Ryan hesitated, then slid the bag of coins back to Togo. His voice quivered as he confessed he'd leave the moment the job was finished. He couldn't fathom the one's habits, the one who dubbed people angels and flooded strangers with fierce, unexpected care. That's exactly why life there pulsed with a warm, unforgettable charm. Ryan declared he'd stay, volunteering to tackle the housework and pitch in wherever needed. He stepped up and took it on, pulling him into a fierce, warm embrace. Their bond already ran deep despite the short time they'd known each other. A few days later at the Regard estate, 5 letters thudded onto the table. Togo froze in bewilderment, then everything clicked into place. Rumors ripped through the streets. Sapphira's painting left everyone breathless. Predictably, Togo was swarmed by people clamoring to commission their own masterpieces.